Chapter 1542. The 100-Clan War had temporarily stopped. Ever since he heard Wine Taoist words, Xiao Chan was also very curious about the Hachibara Senkai. The Eight Desolates was the world where everyone was now, and the central world was just a continent in the Seventh Desolates. It was hard to imagine how big the Eight Desolates was, as the Hachibara Senkai could even defeat the will of the Heavenly Way. How strong were they? The war had stopped, and since there was nothing to do, Xiao Chan once again immersed himself in cultivation. Moreover, the major forces of the human clan had also returned to their respective sections. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. However, to ordinary warriors, they would think that the 100-Clan War had ended, but to many experts, the 100-Clan War was no longer a big deal. This was because they had already learned about the vastness of the world from their respective ancestors, and naturally, they would not continue to focus on what was before them. With nothing to do, Xiao Chun worked hard to cultivate. Days passed, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed. However, there was no news from the will of the Heavenly Way, and there was no change in the gate of the Celestial Realm. Of course, the ancestors of various clans like Wine Taoist still remained in the Central World and did not leave to guard against the gate of the Celestial Realm. If there was any change in the gate of the Celestial Realm, they could immediately stop it. Everything returned to normal. However, just as the Central World was temporarily calm, across the starry sky, in an unknown distance, there was a desolate continent that was even larger than the Central World. At this time, on this continent, one could see countless pits of various sizes. This was a continent that was already riddled with holes, and there was no sign of life on it. However, at the two ends of this continent, there were two huge palaces floating in the air, towering over the horizon. One of the white palaces belonged to the Seventh Desolates, and it was also the place where the experts of the Seventh Desolates gathered. In front of the White Palace, at the other end of the continent, there was a Black Palace. Needless to say, it was naturally from the Hachibara Senkai. The two palaces stood at the two ends of the continent, facing each other. This was also the battlefield between the Seventh Desolates and the Hachibara Senkai. If the Hachibara Senkai wanted to enter the Seventh Desolates, they had to enter from here. This was because this was the only entrance, and the other places were all spatial faults that could not be entered. For thousands of years, the experts of the Seventh Desolates had been guarding this place, blocking the Hachibara Senkai, and had never taken a step into the Seventh Desolates. The Seventh Desolates and the Hachibara Senkai could not break through the Desolates. The Seventh Desolates was, and the Senkai could not break through the Desolates to break through the Seventh Desolates were, and the Senkai could not break through the Desolates. However, this stalemate, this balance, now seemed to have a crack, and this crack came from the gate of the immortal realm above the Central World. The gate of the immortal realm was the result of the Hachibara Senkai's thousands of years of preparation. It took them thousands of years to complete the construction of the gate of the immortal realm, and now, because of the completion of the gate of the immortal realm, the balance was about to be broken. In the Black Palace, warriors in black robes walked back and forth. These people were all members of the Hachibara Senkai, and all of them wore the same black robes. Furthermore, on the north side of the black robes, there were the words, Eight Desolates, embroidered in golden thread. The black robes were very eye-catching, and looking at these Hachibara Senkai members, they seemed to be very free and unrestrained. In fact, this was the specialty of the Eight Desolation Immortal World. One must know that the Eight Desolation Immortal World was a business. Those who could join the Eight Desolation Immortal World had to be at least at the Immortal Realm. Such people, if placed in the outside world, could be said to be giants. Therefore, they did not feel any restrictions when joining the Hachibara Senkai. From the looks of these people, they were very lazy, and in the Black Palace, they could move about freely. How to put it, from these Hachibara Senkai members, it did not feel like they were ordered to do anything. It was as if everyone's goal was the same, and that was why everyone was gathered together. Every Hachibara Senkai member was very free and unrestrained, and did whatever they wanted to do. At the same time, in one of the caves in the Black Palace, it was like a small world, full of birds and fragrant flowers. As far as the eye could see, it was a peach blossom forest. At this time, in the peach blossom ridge, 5 ancient martial art practitioners dressed in the black robes of the Hachibara Senkai sat together in a circle. Sitting in the main seat was a middle-aged man from the human race with an elegant appearance. At this time, the middle-aged man from the human race was leisurely brewing tea, but the middle-aged man from the divine race beside him was somewhat dissatisfied. "Sector Lord, when are we going to act?" Hearing this, the middle-aged man from the human race smiled slightly, and then personally poured a cup of tea for the 4 of them. "There's no hurry." The middle-aged man was called Luo Li, and he was the owner of this black castle, and at the same time, the sector lord of the Hachibara Senkai's 7th realm. The structure of the Hachibara Senkai was not complicated. The entire Hachibara Senkai was divided into 8 realms according to the 8 wastelands, and each realm was equivalent to a hall in an ordinary sect. Each of the 8 realms had its own sector lord, and there was no distinction between their positions. Moreover, each sector lord had the strength to contend with the will of the heavenly way. It was hard to imagine that living beings born in the 8 wastelands could have the strength to contend with the will of the heavenly way. No one knew what level of cultivation they had reached. Luo Li was the sector lord of the 7th realm, and one of the 8 sector lords of the Hachibara Senkai. He was an expert from the human race, and Luo Li's 7th realm had always been in charge of attacking the 7th wastelands. Hearing this, did you feel a little scared? It turned out that the attack on the 7th wastelands was only one of the realms of the Hachibara Senkai. They had not mobilized all their forces to attack the 7th wastelands. Otherwise, the 7th wastelands would have fallen long ago. As for why the Hachibara Senkai had mobilized forces from the other realms to attack the 7th wastelands, the reason was very simple. The Hachibara Senkai was not only attacking the 7th wastelands, but the other realms were also being attacked by the Hachibara Senkai. Basically, one realm against one wastelands. This was the Hachibara Senkai's strategy. When he heard Luo Li's unhurried words, the middle-aged man from the divine clan who had spoken earlier said angrily, "Great sector lord, you are too slow. Look at the 5th realm. They're about to take over the 5th wastelands, but we are still biding our time here. Do you want the 7th realm to become the laughing stock of the Hachibara Senkai? Please add, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 1543. The middle-aged man was also a member of the 7th realm, and could be considered Luo Li's subordinate. However, in front of Luo Li, he didn't show the slightest bit of respect. Of course, it wasn't just him. The other 3 were the same. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's words, Li didn't mind at all. He laughed heartily, as though he didn't care at all. "Ha!" Seeing Luo Li's reaction, the middle-aged man drank the tea in his cup in one gulp, then slammed the teacup in front of Luo Li. "You can still laugh? Our 7th realm is the slowest. Humph, pour the tea." Hearing that, Luo Li actually poured the middle-aged man a cup of tea. Then he stopped laughing and said indifferently, all right. The 5th realm is the 5th realm. It has nothing to do with us. Don't worry. When the time comes, everything will naturally fall into place. When the time comes, success will follow naturally." "I think you're waiting for a meat pie to fall from the sky," retorted the middle-aged man. It had to be said that the 7th realm was indeed interesting to see the way Luo Li and the middle-aged man got along. At the very least, if you didn't tell them that the 7th realm was the Hachibara Senkai, any cultivator from the Central World would probably like the life in the 7th realm. They were carefree and unrestrained. Even when facing the realm lord, they didn't have to be as respectful as the people of ordinary sections. Luo Li wasn't in a hurry to take action, and the 7th realm wasn't in a hurry to break the seal on the immortal domain gate. It was as if nothing had happened. The 2 palaces were still in a stalemate, but no one wanted to make the first move. In the Central World, Xiao Chun was cultivating diligently in the Yin-Yang sect. 2 months passed. One day, the wine Taoist suddenly came looking for Xiao Chun. After looking him up and down for a long time, Xiao Chun couldn't help but ask, "Patriarch," said the wine Taoist drunkenly. "Kid, Do you like drinking? Xiao Chen was taken aback by the wine Taoist's strange question. He looked at Yin Yangzi with a puzzled expression. Yin Yangzi said, "The patriarch wants to personally teach you cultivation." The wine Taoist wanted to personally teach Xiao Chen cultivation. In fact, he had been observing Xiao Chen all this time. He had nothing to do anyway. Furthermore, Xiao Chen's talents had indeed surprised the wine Taoist. Xiao Chen's talents were close to the maximum score of 100. Such talents were much higher than that of the wine Taoist, whose talents were only at 98 meters. No one knew when the battle with the Hachibiru Sunkai would end. The seventh wilderness needed to constantly produce experts. Therefore, Xiao Chen and the others were the hope of the seventh wilderness. The will of the heavenly way also sent word that the wine Taoist and the others shouldn't leave the central world for the time being. In the meantime, they could choose some talented young people from the central world to cultivate. It could be said that the will of the heavenly Tao had asked the wine Taoist and the others to take in disciples. Moreover, there was a clear goal, which was to raise the cultivation of the younger generation to the quasi-saint realm within a year. They didn't know what the will of the heavenly way wanted to do, but Xiao Chen was the only one in the entire younger generation of the human race who could catch the wine Taoist's eye. Moreover, with the wine Taoist personality, he wasn't interested in taking in disciples. Therefore, he only chose Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen was stunned when he heard Yin Yangzi's words. He then looked at the wine Taoist again and said helplessly, "I'm just average." Did he like to drink? Sure. However, Xiao Chen didn't drink like the wine Taoist, who could drink himself drunk with a wine jug at any time. Xiao Chen definitely couldn't do that. Therefore, he could only be considered average. The wine Taoist laughed when he heard Xiao Chen's words. Average is fine. Follow me, and I guarantee that your alcohol tolerance will improve by leaps and bounds. Let's go." With that, the wine Taoist grabbed Xiao Chen, and the two of them instantly disappeared. Xiao Chen was taken away by the wine Taoist. Of course, Yin Yangzi also told Qin Shru and the other two girls about this matter. The three girls were relieved when they heard that Xiao Chen was following the wine Taoist to cultivate. Moreover, they were secretly happy for Xiao Chen. After all, the wine Taoist was an existence that surpassed the great sage realm. To be able to receive his guidance was indeed a great opportunity for Xiao Chen. The wine Taoist took Xiao Chen to some unknown place to cultivate. Of course, it wasn't just the wine Taoist. The others, such as Granny Tianxiu and Shun Batian, also found some talented juniors to cultivate. After all, this was an order from the will of the heavenly way. However, Granny Tianxiu and the others weren't like the old drunkard wine Taoist. They didn't just pick one person. Each of them picked several young geniuses to cultivate. From the Dragon Clan, Long Qing was chosen by the Dragon Clan's patriarch and was taken away along with Long Yang. Of course, Xin Yuanling was also lucky enough to join them. This was naturally due to Long Qing's contribution. As for Qin Shru and the other two girls, they were also taken away by Granny Tianxiu the day after Xiao Chen was taken away by the wine Taoist. This was also due to Tianyue's contribution. The various patriarchs began to cultivate with the young geniuses that they had chosen. To be able to receive guidance from these patriarchs was indeed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Of course, among the young geniuses, there were only 4 that the patriarchs had chosen: the Divine Lord, Tianmushi, Long Yang, and Xiao Chen. The Divine Lord was from the God Clan, but he didn't know about the mysterious youth. He also didn't know that the God Clan had so many the great sage. Therefore, Shun Batian didn't take his anger out on the Divine Lord because of the God Clan. On the contrary, he thought highly of him. Many of the young geniuses in the Central World had obtained their own opportunities. However, the one that everyone envied the most was naturally Xiao Chen. This was because the other patriarchs had chosen at least a few people to cultivate. As for the wine Taoist, he had only chosen Xiao Chen alone. If it was a one-on-one battle, Xiao Chen would obviously be able to obtain more. After all, the wine Taoist had placed all his attention on Xiao Chen. However, was that the truth? At this moment, Xiao Chen was brought somewhere unknown by the wine Taoist. In any case, they were in a bamboo forest. Moreover, This bamboo forest didn't allow flight or tearing through the void. It was very strange. In the bamboo forest, the wine Taoist and Xiao Chun casually sat on the ground. At first, Xiao Chun thought that the wine Taoist would begin to teach him. However, who would have thought that the wine Taoist would just casually toss over a wine jug and say lazily, "I don't have much to teach you about drinking. No matter how much I say, it's all nonsense. Just one word and you'll be done. Within 2 hours, finish this jug of wine." "What? Are you serious?" Hearing the wine Taoist's words, Xiao Chun was stunned. Then he went crazy in his heart. Could it be that this old man really only wanted to teach him how to drink? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1544. Xiao Chun was speechless as he looked at the wine jug in his hand. Could it be that the wine Taoist only wanted to teach him how to drink? The wine Taoist said impatiently as he looked at the startled Xiao Chun, "Why aren't you drinking? If you can't even learn how to drink, don't even think about it. Does this old ancestor need to learn how to drink?" Xiao Chun couldn't help but mutter when he heard this. Although his voice was soft, the wine Taoist still heard it. He immediately laughed and said, "Haha, if you don't need to learn, then drink. Remember, finish it within 2 hours." The wine jug was finished within 2 hours. In fact, the wine jug wasn't very big. Xiao Chun looked at the wine jug in his hand and directly opened it and took a big gulp without saying anything. He thought that this wine would be easy to drink. However, after Xiao Chun took a big gulp, a burning sensation spread from his throat to his stomach and then to his entire body. It was so strong that it was hard to accept. Logically speaking, Xiao Chun was already at the sage realm great perfection. Drinking wine shouldn't be a problem for Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun should be able to withstand it, no matter how strong the wine was. However, the wine jug given by the wine Taoist completely ignored Xiao Chun's cultivation. No matter how high his cultivation was, he couldn't withstand this wine. Xiao Chun was caught off guard. He felt his throat become hoarse for a moment. He couldn't even speak. Moreover, the burning sensation didn't dissipate with the passage of time. Instead, it became more and more violent in his body. It was as if it wanted to burn him alive. The wine Taoist's expression changed drastically. He looked at Xiao Chun's appearance and said with a smile, Boy, you underestimated this old Taoist wine. Now you're at a disadvantage. Don't stop. Continue drinking. Finish it within 2 hours." It was just a mouthful, but it was already unbearable for Xiao Chun. This kind of pain was even more terrifying than refining his body. However, under such intense pain, Xiao Chun gradually felt that his cultivation seemed to be increasing slowly. At the same time, his physical strength seemed to be increasing as well. This wine has the effect of increasing cultivation and tempering the physical body. Xiao Chun even ignored the excruciating pain as he sensed this. He could not help but feel a sense of excitement in his heart. After confirming it again and again, he found that this wine could indeed increase his cultivation and temper his physical body. With this discovery, Xiao Chun didn't care about the intense pain. He immediately drank another mouthful. Seeing that Xiao Chun did not cower because of the intense pain, on the contrary, after discovering the effects of the wine, he actually took the initiative to gulp down a few mouthfuls. Seeing this, the wine Taoist smiled slightly and nodded in satisfaction. This wine was naturally not an ordinary item. It was personally refined by the wine Taoist. The materials used were extremely precious heavenly treasures. Moreover, because he always carried it with him, the wine was nourished by the wine Taoist spiritual energy almost every day. Therefore, although it looked like an ordinary wine, it was in no way inferior to any heavenly treasures. The wine Taoist usually couldn't bear to drink wine like this. This was a true, peerless treasure. If it was placed in the central world, even the great sage wouldn't be able to resist snatching it. However, although this wine was good, it still required a lot of perseverance to reap the benefits from it. Take Xiao Chun, for example. He had already drunk half a pot, but his skin had turned red at this moment. It was as if he had been cooked. Under the immortal realm, no one could resist the burning of this wine. If one wanted to obtain benefits, one had to endure this kind of pain. However, this kind of pain was not so easy to endure. Moreover, if one wanted to continue drinking in a situation that was already very painful, it was estimated that not many people could do it. However, Xiao Chun clearly surprised the wine Taoist. At least in terms of perseverance, Xiao Chun's performance had already amazed the wine Taoist. This child is teachable. The wine Taoist nodded with a smile as he looked at Xiao Chun in front of him. Xiao Chun had completely ignored the wine Taoist's existence. At this moment, it was as if his entire body was about to explode. The intense pain became even more intense as the wine flowed down his throat. However, at the same time, his cultivation and physical body were indeed improving. This made Xiao Chun feel both pain and joy. While enduring the unbearable pain, he continued to drink. Moreover, with every sip of wine, the pain became even more intense. This was completely self-harming. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't have the courage to drink this wine anymore. However, Xiao Chun was different. He had already determined that this wine was a treasure. Xiao Chun didn't care about anything else and continued to pour the wine into his mouth. After drinking half a pot of wine, Xiao Chun was almost about to faint from the pain. His head was also groggy, as if he was drunk. However, it was a little different from ordinary drunkenness. Although his head was groggy, the pain didn't reduce at all. On the contrary, it seemed to have increased a lot. Xiao Chun didn't know if it was an illusion or not. He didn't have the courage to continue drinking this wine. This was like asking you to stab yourself with a knife. Perhaps you could withstand the first stab and barely the second, but what about the third and fourth stab? People would eventually break down. Xiao Chun's current situation was very similar. He really didn't have the courage to continue drinking this wine. After all, with every sip, the pain in his body would become even more intense. Feeling that there was still half a pot of wine in his hand, Xiao Chun's eyes turned red. Then he gritted his teeth and drank the rest of the wine in one gulp. If he drank it one mouthful at a time, Xiao Chun would really break down. In that case, he might as well be more direct. If he had to die, he would die more quickly. After drinking all the wine in the pot in one gulp, Xiao Chun's pain suddenly seemed to be magnified by 100 times. Even with Xiao Chun's perseverance and endurance, he couldn't help but scream. Then, he rolled on the ground in pain. Looking at the cooked prawns, the wine Taoist blinked and a glint of astonishment flashed in his eyes. This little lunatic, wine Taoist, knew the pain brought by this wine. Not to mention Xiao Chun. Even Yin Yangzi and the great sage probably couldn't bear it. But Xiao Chun actually drank the remaining half pot of wine in one gulp. This was definitely something that only a lunatic could do. However, apart from being shocked, wine Taoist also had a better impression of Xiao Chun. A person with such great perseverance and Xiao Chun's extraordinary talent. TSK. Who knows what heights such a person could grow to in the future? Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 1545. The small jug of wine made Xiao Chun feel as if he had fallen into hell. The unbearable pain almost burned every piece of flesh and bone in Xiao Chun's body. The pain lasted for 3 whole days. During that time, Xiao Chun wanted to faint countless times, but he could not do so. After 3 days, Xiao Chun's consciousness finally disappeared, and he fell into a deep sleep as if he was drunk. It could be said that Xiao Chun had almost walked through the gates of hell during the past 3 days. The pain was far more intense than all the pain that Xiao Chun had ever experienced. After accompanying Xiao Chun for 3 days, he had slept for 3 days. When he saw that Xiao Chun had finally fallen into a deep sleep, the wine Taoist stood up unsteadily and hiccuped. "You're drunk already? Sai, you said you could drink, but your alcohol tolerance is so poor." As he spoke, the wine Taoist grabbed Xiao Chun and took a step forward. His figure instantly disappeared from where he stood. He did not know where the bamboo forest was, but if one was in the starry sky, it would not be difficult to see that the bamboo forest was actually located on a very, very small piece of land. It was more accurate to call a piece of land than a large city in the central world. However, Such a small piece of land was currently floating in the starry sky like a lone island. This place was already outside the central world. Of course, Xiao Chen clearly did not know this. At this moment, Xiao Chan was sleeping soundly. It was as if the bitterness was over and the sweetness was about to begin. At this moment, the pain all over Xiao Chen's body receded and was replaced by an indescribable feeling of comfort. After sleeping like this for a day, when Xiao Chen woke up again, he discovered that he was sleeping in a bamboo hut. The bamboo hut was not large, and the decorations were very simple. Apart from a bed made of bamboo, there was nothing else. His mind was incomparably clear, without the slightest bit of drowsiness from being drunk. Moreover, his body also felt boundless strength, as if it had an inexhaustible strength. The wine Taoist wine was good stuff, but the process was really unbearable. Even Xiao Chen almost couldn't endure it. After getting up and stretching his body, Xiao Chen felt refreshed. He then pushed open the door and walked out. Outside the bamboo house was still the same endless bamboo forest. When Xiao Chen walked out of the bamboo house, he also saw Wine Taoist lying on a reclining chair. He still had that drunken look on his face. This old man never seemed to rejoice, nor did he look at Xiao Chen. He took a sip of wine and said lazily, "You're awake? Stinking brat, you really can sleep. You slept for an entire day and night. Your alcohol tolerance is really bad. Can't hold his liquor?" When he heard this, the corners of Xiao Chen's mouth twitched unconsciously. He cursed in his heart. "With that wine of yours, let alone me, even the great sage wouldn't be able to drink it." Although he complained in his heart, Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't show it on his face. He looked at Wine Taoist and said, "Are you still drinking today?" Although the wine was unbearable, it was undeniably good stuff. Unfortunately, when he heard Xiao Chen's words, Wine Taoist immediately scolded him in annoyance. "Stinking brat, do you think this old man's wine is cabbage from the streets? I'm not drinking today. Let's do something else." Wine Taoist's immortal brew was naturally not cabbage from the streets. On the contrary, it was very precious. Even Wine Taoist himself didn't have much of it. Furthermore, it was extremely difficult to brew it. It could be said that every bit he drank was a little less. Moreover, although the immortal brew was good, with Xiao Chen's current cultivation, he wouldn't be able to endure it if he continuously drank it like this. As such, he still needed to control the rhythm of the brewing. A wisp of disappointment flashed through Xiao Chen's eyes when he heard Wine Taoist's words. At the same time, Wine Taoist lazily stood up from the recliner. He glanced at Xiao Chen and scolded him in annoyance. "Stinking brat, you really are greedy. Aren't you afraid of drinking yourself to death?" As he spoke, Wine Taoist strode into the bamboo forest. When he saw this, Xiao Chen hurriedly followed. The two of them followed behind Wine Taoist and arrived at the depths of the bamboo forest. A small glyph formation had appeared there at an unknown time. The glyph formation was very small, and it was only big enough to accommodate one person. "Go in," Wine Taoist said when they arrived outside the glyph formation. Although Xiao Chen didn't know the function of the glyph formation, he still followed Wine Taoist's instructions and entered the glyph formation and sat down cross-legged. Wine Taoist formed a seal with both hands as he sat cross-legged in the glyph formation. Immediately, something that looked like a ripple of water shot up into the sky from the glyph formation and instantly enveloped Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen didn't feel anything special when he was enveloped by the ripple of water. However, Wine Taoist said indifferently at this moment, "I can't teach you much. In terms of martial skills, I do have a few that are suitable for you. However, these aren't enough. After all, you can cultivate saint-level martial skills. Of course, even if I teach you immortal-level martial skills, you won't be able to cultivate them with your current cultivation, let alone use them. Therefore, the most important thing for me now is to teach you how to cultivate the law and the sword domain." Above saint-level martial skills were immortal-level martial skills. Of course, it was useless to teach Xiao Chen immortal-level martial skills now. Moreover, Xiao Chen was a sword cultivator, and Wine Taoist didn't have any sword Dao immortal-level martial skills. Therefore, Wine Taoist couldn't help Xiao Chun much in terms of martial skills. However, Wine Taoist still had a few saint-level martial skills that were suitable for Xiao Chun. However, this wasn't the main point. Wine Taoist had already observed Xiao Chun before. Compared to the cultivation of martial skills, Wine Taoist discovered that Xiao Chen's current shortcomings should be the cultivation of the law and the sword domain. In particular, the law. Xiao Chun still hadn't comprehended a level 3 law. This was somewhat inexplicable. Therefore, Wine Taoist had placed his focus on the cultivation of the law from the beginning. Xiao Chen nodded in agreement when he heard Wine Taoist's words. Indeed, he didn't need Wine Taoist to help him too much in terms of martial skills. Even if Wine Taoist directly gave him a few saint-level martial skills, Xiao Chen's talent alone would be enough for him to successfully cultivate them. However, with Wine Taoist's guidance, his cultivation would definitely be faster. Compared to martial skills, improving the law and the sword domain was the most important thing for Xiao Chun at the moment. As soon as he finished speaking, the Wine Taoist took a sip of wine and said with a look of disdain, "You little brat, you haven't even comprehended a single level 3 nomological law. I really don't know where your talent has gone. All right, listen to what I'm going to say next. I'll only say it once, so listen carefully. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1546. The Wine Taoist said slowly. Xiao Chun calmed his mind and focused on listening to what the Wine Taoist was going to say next. Laws and domain power have one thing in common, and that's the world. Whether it's the power of laws or domain power, they all come from the world. If you want to control this power, the first step is to comprehend it. Comprehend the power of the world and borrow it from there. That's the first step. After that, it's control. From borrowing the power of the world to controlling the power of the world. As a result, if you want to increase your power of laws or domain power, it's inseparable from the world. You need to comprehend the world, the laws of the world, and the aura of the world. You need to find the power that suits you the best. The Wine Taoist spoke slowly. Then he looked at Xiao Chun. At that moment, the drunkenness on the Wine Taoist's face seemed to vanish in an instant. 2 beams of light shot out from his eyes. This formation can help you comprehend the power of the world more easily. Remember, comprehend is not to comprehend it blindly. Instead, it's to fuse with it. Think of a way to fuse with the world. Imagine that you're a part of the world. You're the sky, and you're the earth. Think of yourself as a part of the world. Find the power you want from it, and try to comprehend it and control it. Xiao Chun became thoughtful when he heard the Wine Taoist's words. It had to be said that the Wine Taoist's words had indeed opened a new door for Xiao Chun. From beginning to end, Xiao Chun's cultivation, or rather, not just Xiao Chun's alone, but the cultivation of all the martial artists in the Central World, was all about comprehending the power of laws and the power of domains. It was all about comprehending the power of heaven and earth. However, the method the Wine Taoist taught Xiao Chun was not to comprehend it, but to fuse with it. There was no need to comprehend the world. Instead, it was to find a way to fuse with the world. You were the sky, and you were the earth. That way, you could use the identity of the world to find the power you needed. It could be said that they were 2 different methods of connecting. The former was like borrowing the power of heaven and earth as an outsider, while the latter was directly comparing oneself to heaven and earth to obtain the power of heaven and earth, which was the power of law and domain. This was a completely new method of cultivation, and this was the first time Xiao Chun had heard of such a method. However, at this moment, Xiao Chun slowly closed his eyes and did as the Wine Taoist had said. He attempted to merge his body with the world and become a part of it. Just as the Wine Taoist had said, the array formation was indeed helpful to Xiao Chun's cultivation. However, the most important thing was Xiao Chun himself. Xiao Chun turned himself into a part of the world and kept thinking about Wine Taoist's words. He closed his eyes, and after an unknown amount of time, he entered a very mysterious state. He felt as if he had truly become a part of this world. Everything around him seemed to be closely related to him. For example, the wind between heaven and earth the air between heaven and earth, and even the faintly discernible sounds between heaven and earth. Everything seemed to be related to Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun didn't know how rare it was to be in such a mysterious state. At this moment, he was completely immersed in it. Just as Xiao Chun entered such a mysterious state, Wine Taoist, who had been guarding beside Xiao Chun, had a look of shock on his face. After taking a few big gulps of wine, he said with a bitter look on his face, "Oh my, is this kid a monster? 2 hours. It's his first attempt, and he actually succeeded in 2 hours?" That's right. Xiao Chun had indeed succeeded. He had successfully fused with heaven and earth. Of course, this was only the most superficial fusion, but even so, it was terrifying enough. One had to know that the Wine Taoist took an entire year to reach this step, but Xiao Chun only used 2 hours. He believed that his talent was definitely not low. Otherwise, how could the Wine Taoist break through to the immortal realm? But now, facing Xiao Chun, the Wine Taoist doubted his own talent for the first time. It couldn't be helped. 2 hours. If this news were to spread, not only the Wine Taoist, but even Granny Tianxiu and Shen Batian would be shocked. The Wine Taoist stared at Xiao Chun as if he was looking at a monster. At this moment, the Wine Taoist's expression could be said to be extremely interesting. It was also because Xiao Chun was completely immersed in that mysterious state that he didn't notice the Wine Taoist's expression at all. After a while, the Wine Taoist helplessly sat down beside Xiao Chun and kept gulping down wine. As he drank, he shook his head and said, I'm old. I can't put him in an important position. These little guys nowadays are all monsters." The Wine Taoist really didn't know what to say to Xiao Chun. In any case, he'd been hit by this kid today. Xiao Chun closed his eyes, and his aura weakened to the limit. He maintained the state for half a month. After half a month, Xiao Chun opened his eyes, and a smile flashed in his eyes. Is this the feeling of heaven and earth? Creating all things, containing all things, controlling all things. Kid, it seems like you've gained a lot. Just as Xiao Chun was comprehending, the Wine Taoist appeared in front of him without him noticing and said with a drunk face, Indeed, in half a month, Xiao Chun had gained a lot of insights. Hearing the Wine Taoist's words, Xiao Chun nodded and said, Yes, it's not small. Seeing Xiao Chun admit it, the Wine Taoist didn't waste any time and threw a jug of wine over. That's good. Drink it. It was still the immortal brew. However, seeing the immortal brew this time, Xiao Chun didn't hesitate much and immediately drank it in big gulps. Then, just like before, he was in so much pain that he wanted to die. 3 days later, he was drunk and unconscious again. The immortal brew was no doubt good stuff, but it was too King torturous. Moreover, it was the kind of torture that was self-torture. In the following days, Xiao Chun was completely immersed in cultivation. He brewed wine, comprehended the heavens and the earth, and became one with the heavens and the earth. Day after day, the Wine Taoist began to take some time out to teach Xiao Chun martial arts. Day after day, Xiao Chun improved in all aspects. His cultivation, martial skills, power of laws, sword realm, and physical body were all improving slowly and orderly. Spring passed and autumn came. Cold and hot alternated. Unknowingly, Xiao Chun had stayed in the bamboo forest for 5 years. 5 years seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, and it was very, very fast. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1547. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed. Xiao Chun's improvement in these 5 years was undoubtedly huge. It was no exaggeration to say that compared to 5 years ago, Xiao Chun's strength had reached a whole new level. Xiao Chun was taught by a powerful being in the immortal realm like the Wine Taoist. Furthermore, the Wine Taoist had devoted his heart and soul to Xiao Chun for the past 5 years. As such, it was understandable that Xiao Chun had made such great progress. On this day, the Wine Taoist was teaching Xiao Chun in the same simple bamboo house. In these 5 years, this bamboo house had become Xiao Chun's home. The Wine Taoist looked at Xiao Chun with the same drunken expression as before. Brat, I've taught you everything I can. It's time to go back. In truth, Xiao Chen's improvement in these 5 years had shocked the wine Taoist. He was simply a monster. Even with the wine Taoist experience, he had never seen anyone whose cultivation speed could keep up with Xiao Chen's, let alone surpass him. They had already received orders from the will of the heavenly way for the wine Taoist, Granny Tianxiu, Shun Batian, and the others to bring the younger generation back to the central world. In these 5 years, under the nurturing of the various immortal realm experts, the younger generation should have grown a lot. Who knew what the will of the heavenly way would do next? However, with the wine Taoist personality, he naturally wouldn't ask too much about these matters. In any case, he would do whatever the will of the heavenly way told him to. Moreover, the wine Taoist had taught Xiao Chun everything he could. Other than the immortal techniques that he didn't teach Xiao Chun, the wine Taoist had taught everything else without holding back. As for the immortal techniques, it wasn't that the wine Taoist didn't want to teach them. Firstly, Xiao Chun hadn't reached the immortal realm yet. Secondly, the wine Taoist didn't have any Sword Tao immortal techniques that were suitable for Xiao Chun, so he couldn't teach them. Rather than forcing Xiao Chun to walk his own path, it was better to let Xiao Chun find his own path. Therefore, the wine Taoist had taught Xiao Chun more basic things in these 5 years. Xiao Chun was stunned when he heard that he was leaving. He immediately snatched the jug of wine from the wine Taoist's hand and took a big gulp. "Old drunkard, are you really leaving this time?" Xiao Chun actually doubted the wine Taoist's words. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on Xiao Chun. In these 5 years, 9 out of 10 of the wine Taoist's words were false. Xiao Chun didn't believe him at all. After 5 years together, Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist relationship had become much closer. Moreover, the wine Taoist's carefree personality had indeed had a profound impact on Xiao Chun. Compared to 5 years ago, Xiao Chun had become even more carefree. Of course, the biggest change was Xiao Chen's alcohol tolerance. It could even be said that Xiao Chun had unknowingly become a little drunkard. Xiao Chun felt that the wine Taoist was both a teacher and a friend. After all, the wine Taoist personality was there. If he wanted Xiao Chun to treat him with the same respect as he treated others, Xiao Chun really couldn't do it. Of course, the wine Taoist didn't like that kind of feeling either. Therefore, in his heart, Xiao Chun did indeed treat the wine Taoist as his master. However, Xiao Chun had never called the wine Taoist master. Some things didn't have to be said out loud. Perhaps it was more meaningful to keep it in one's heart. To put it bluntly, after 5 years together, the wine Taoist and Xiao Chun were two indecent drunkards, one old and one young. The wine Taoist was the old drunkard and the old indecent, while Xiao Chun was the young drunkard and the young indecent. The wine Taoist immediately cursed when he heard Xiao Chen's words. "Little brat, you have no respect for your elders. I'm your master. If you don't show me any respect, be careful of being struck by lightning." With that, the wine Taoist snatched the jug of wine from Xiao Chen's hand and said angrily, "Also, how many times have I told you? This jug of wine is mine." With that, the wine Taoist took a big gulp of wine as if he was drinking to vent his anger. Xiao Chun smiled indifferently when he saw the wine Taoist's angry expression. Even if the heavens were to strike by lightning, you would be the first to be struck. The heavens should have dealt with an unscrupulous old Taoist like you a long time ago. "Ah, little brat, you're rebelling. Looks like if I don't carry out the family rules today, there won't be any rules between us master and disciple," the wine Taoist said fiercely when he heard that. The two of them played and cursed. This was the way Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist got along for the past 5 years. There were no rules, but it was very heartwarming. Furthermore, both of them cared a lot about each other. While Xiao Chun might have said that, deep down he was extremely respectful to the wine Taoist. The same was true for the wine Taoist. While the wine Taoist did not say it out loud, he had long regarded Xiao Chun as his disciple and family. After a round of playful cursing, Xiao Chun suddenly said indifferently, "Old drunkard, are you leaving this time?" Upon hearing that, the wine Taoist, who was about to scold Xiao Chun, was taken aback. Then, a trace of loneliness flashed in his eyes. "Little brat, I think so." Perhaps it was because it was time for them to part But the wine Taoist didn't seem to like the atmosphere. He forced a smile and scolded. "What's wrong, little brat? You can't bear to part with me? I'm not going to die. When you break through to the immortal realm, you can naturally come and find me." The wine Taoist thought that Xiao Chun would refute him, but to his surprise, Xiao Chun said with a serious face, "Yes, when I break through to the immortal realm, I'll come and find you." Xiao Chen's seriousness stunned the wine Taoist for a moment. But then, the wine Taoist slapped Xiao Chun on the head and scolded, "Little brat, let's go." With that, the wine Taoist grabbed Xiao Chun, and the two of them disappeared on the spot in an instant. Immortals were very fast. As for how fast, Xiao Chun didn't have a clear idea. But to make an analogy, the great sage was almost like a turtle in front of an immortal. Therefore, it didn't take long for Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist to return to the central world and the heavenly yin-yang sect. 5 years had passed. Facing the familiar heavenly yin-yang sect again, Xiao Chun sighed softly. "It still hasn't changed. I wonder how Shui Ro and the others are doing." After not seeing them for 5 years, Xiao Chun really missed Qin Shuru and the others. But when the wine Taoist heard this, he spoke in an extremely untimely manner. "Little brat, all you think about is women. You're useless. I'm still better than you. After living for so many years, you don't even have a woman. How about it? Do you want me, your disciple, to help you find one?" Xiao Chun retorted without backing down. Hearing this, the master and disciple started arguing again. Moreover, they didn't care that this was the main square of the heavenly yin-yang sect, and there were many experts of the heavenly yin-yang sect present. "Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1548. Wonderful, no pop-up window to read for free. Originally, the experts of the Yin and Yang sects were surprised by the sudden appearance of the wine Taoist and Xiao Chun. After all, it had been 5 years. Everyone in the Yin and Yang sects knew that Xiao Chun had followed the wine Taoist to cultivate, but other than that, they knew nothing. The return of the two of them had initially shocked everyone. However, Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist had already started bickering with each other after only a short while. Everyone present was speechless as they watched the two of them, one old and one young, not backing down at all. This was not right. Of course, they did not know that Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist had been getting along for the past 5 years. In the face of an immortal realm expert, Xiao Chun did not give him any face at all. In the eyes of everyone present, he was simply tired of living. Just as the two of them were arguing, Yin Yangzi also appeared in the square. He had also received news of the wine Taoist, and Xiao Chun's return and specially rushed over. However, when he saw Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist arguing, Yin Yangzi was stunned. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, Yin Yangzi still spoke up. "Xiao Chun, how can you be so rude to the patriarch?" Naturally, he did not dare to talk to the wine Taoist, so Yin Yangzi could only scold Xiao Chun. However, who would have thought that after being scolded by Yin Yangzi, before Xiao Chun could say anything, the wine Taoist shouted in dissatisfaction, "We are master and disciple. Why are you interrupting? Go to the side." Well, Yin Yangzi was originally being kind, but who would have thought that he would be scolded by the wine Taoist in the end? Hearing the wine Taoist's words, Yin Yangzi looked depressed and thought to himself, "Who did I offend?" Yin Yangzi felt depressed and wronged, but he still stood to the side and did not say anything. The wine Taoist looked at Xiao Chun and said angrily, "Scram, scram. Scram, scram, scram. Stinking brat, go find your woman. This old Taoist will not accompany you." With that, the wine Taoist disappeared from where he stood. Xiao Chun curled his lips, then looked at Yin Yangzi and bowed. "Ancestor." Xiao Chun's attitude towards Yin Yangzi and the wine Taoist were completely different. Seeing this, Yin Yangzi was stunned, but then he nodded unnaturally and said, "Yes, it's good that you're back." After greeting Yin Yangzi, Xiao Chun directly returned to his cave dwelling. Qin Shuru and the other two ladies, as well as Xin Yuan Ling and the rest, had yet to return. Xiao Chun felt a little bored and decided to sleep. In the past 5 years of cultivating with the wine Taoist, Xiao Chun had not rested much. Now that he finally had a chance to relax, Xiao Chun did not want to cultivate anymore. He returned earlier than Qin Shiru and the others. A day passed, and on the second day, Qin Shi, Xinyuan Ling, and the others, as well as Tianyu, returned to the heavenly Yin-Yang sect. Knowing that Xiao Chun and the wine Taoist had returned, the four girls did not care about anything else and rushed back to their cave dwelling. After 5 years, seeing Xiao Chun again, the four girls were extremely excited. Of course, Xiao Chun was the same. The four girls had been cultivating with Granny Tianxiu for the past 5 years, and their progress was good. Xiao Chun could see at a glance that Qin Shiru and the other two girls had broken through to the Perfection Saint Realm, and Tianyu had reached the Perfection Saint Realm. In the past 5 years, the four girls had made great progress, and Xiao Chun was sincerely happy for them. Husband, aren't you going to praise me? I didn't slack off in the past 5 years. Gu Lingyao looked at Xiao Chun proudly. The little girl was indeed very happy. Her cultivation had improved a lot, and she was finally able to meet Xiao Chun. Naturally, the little girl would not let go of Xiao Chun without any explanation. In the face of Gu Lingyao's coquettishness, Xiao Chun smiled and patted her little head. Good, good, good. My Lingyao is the best. Xiao Chun saw the four girls' cultivation at a glance, but the four girls could not see Xiao Chun's cultivation at all. At this time, Qin Shiru asked doubtfully, Husband, what's your cultivation now? Me? It's a secret for the time being. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled and kept them in suspense. Xiao Chun did not say. Qin Shiru curled his lips, but 100 Flower Fairy smiled softly and said, Husband, your cultivation is at least in the quasi-sage realm. Although they could not see Xiao Chun's specific cultivation, Xiao Chun had reached the Perfection Saint Realm 5 years ago. Now, 5 years had passed, and Xiao Chun had been by Wine Daoist's side for the past 5 years. Wine Daoist did not choose anyone else but Xiao Chun, so Xiao Chun's cultivation must have broken through to the quasi-sage realm. However, it was not certain what level of quasi-sage realm he had reached. 100 Flower Fairy's words were correct, but Xiao Chun just smiled and did not give a clear answer. Everyone gathered again, and later, Xinyuan Ling and Long Qing also came to the Taiyang sect. Long Qing came specially because she had not seen Xiao Chun for many years, so Long Qing came specially. Everyone gathered together, so naturally there was no lack of liveliness. In the cave mansion, they drank happily. After a lively night, in the morning of the next day, Xiao Chun, Qin Shu, Chun Ling, Long Qing, and the young people of the Central World who were valued by Wine Daoist and other old ancestors were enveloped by a light beam. They did not know what this light beam meant, but it did not allow them to explain. They were directly taken away by the light beam. Just like a teleportation array, everything went dark. When everyone regained their senses, they found that they had appeared in an unfamiliar land. In front of them was a barren plain, and at this moment, everyone was standing on this wasteland. Xiao Chun, Qin Shu, Xinyuan Ling, Long Qing, Shun Jun, Tian Mushi, Long Yang, and other familiar faces all appeared here. Everyone had a puzzled look on their faces. Obviously, they were all brought here by force. There were a total of 48 people, and these people were all brought by the old ancestors to cultivate. They could be considered the top young people of the Central World and were even stronger than the saints on the saint ranking. When everyone was brought here, Long Yang took the lead and said lazily, What are you doing? I'm sleeping. It turned out that Long Yang was brought here by force while he was sleeping. Hearing this, Feng Ju also asked doubtfully, Where is this place? They did not know where this place was, nor did they know their purpose in coming here. However, just as the crowd was puzzled and looking around, suddenly, several tens of pillars of light descended from the sky not far away from them. Furthermore, within each of these pillars of light was a figure. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1549. Not far away, dozens of light pillars fell from the sky, and it was not over yet. As time went by, more and more light pillars appeared. Each light pillar represented someone who had been transmitted here. After about 10 minutes, The wasteland was divided into 7 camps, and each camp was made up of a few dozen people. The largest group had over 50 people, and the smallest group had over 30 people. Moreover, they were all of the younger generation. The people in the 7 camps were inquiring about each other. In the camp of the Central World, Xiao Chun and the others were also sizing up the young warriors in the other 6 camps. After the initial doubts, Xiao Chun and the others seemed to have guessed something. The Divine Emperor said lightly, they should be the young talents from the other 6 continents in the 7th realm. Everyone had learned about the 7th realm from their ancestors. They knew that the Central World was not the only continent in the 7th realm. In the whole 7th realm, there are 7 continents like the Central World. Of course, the 7 continents mentioned here were at least as large as the Central World. Other small continents were not included. Moreover, there are no geniuses on those small continents. The real geniuses of the 7th realm were all gathered on the 7 continents. Originally, ordinary warriors did not know about the 7th realm. Only those who had reached the immortal realm were qualified to know about the 7th realm. Therefore, not only did the Central World not know about the 7th realm, but also the warriors in the other 6 continents did not know about the 7th realm. This time, the Gate of the Immortal area was built in the Central World. The news of the 7th realm was made public, and the experts in the other 6 continents also knew about it. After learning about the 7th realm, they realized that the Central World was not called the Central World, but the 7th continent. Yes, the 7 continents of the 7th realm were numbered from 1 to 7. The Central World, where Xiao Chun and the others were from, was the 7th continent. At this time, Xiao Chun and the others were sizing up the young talents from the other continents, and they were also sizing up Xiao Chun and the others. The young talents from the 7 continents did not know each other, but it was undeniable that they were the top of the younger generation on their respective continents. This was especially true after the Immortal Realm patriarchs had arrived and received guidance from their respective patriarchs. Their cultivation bases had improved tremendously, and so had their battle prowess. The 7th continent had wine Taoist and the others. The other 6 continents also had their ancestors in the Immortal Realm. Of course, this was also an order from the will of the Heavenly Way. Each of the 7 continents had their own saint rankings. This time, many Immortal Realm patriarchs had arrived and selected the most outstanding people on the saint rankings to nurture. As a result, the hundreds of young geniuses present had truly experienced a qualitative leap in their strength. The young geniuses of the 7 continents were gathered in one place, and it was inevitable that they would compete. After sizing each other up, some of them began to chat with each other. In fact, 5 young men and women walked over to the left of Xiao Chun and the others. One of them smiled and said, "We're from the 5th continent. You're from the 5th continent, and you're..." From his appearance, it was obvious that he was a god. "The 7th continent," the Divine Lord said coolly. This was the first time he had come into contact with people from the other continents, so his attitude could only be described as cold. Of course, this also had to do with the Divine Lord's personality. Furthermore, after what had happened with the gods, the Divine Lord's personality had become even colder. He seemed to keep everyone at arm's length. It was only when he was facing Tian Mushi, Long Yang, and Xiao Chun that the Divine Lord would say a few words. The young god from the 5th continent didn't get angry in the face of the Divine Lord's coldness. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Oh, so you're from the 7th continent, the continent where the Hachibara Sankai constructed the gate to the immortal domain?" The Divine Lord's eyes flashed coldly when he heard this. It wasn't just the Divine Lord. The other people from the 7th continent all had grim expressions. His words were full of contempt. In truth, the matter of the gate to the immortal domain had long since spread throughout the 7th realm. The experts of the other 6 continents also knew that the 8 Desolates' immortal realm had constructed the gate to the immortal domain on the 1st continent. That was why the 7th realm had fallen into such a dangerous situation. Because the gate to the immortal domain had appeared on the 7th continent, the people of the other 6 continents naturally felt that the 7th continent was trash. After all, if the 7th continent hadn't been careless, how could the Hachibara Sankai have successfully constructed the gate to the immortal domain on the seventh continent. It was the seventh continent that had harmed the seventh realm. Therefore, when the cultivators of the other six continents faced the seventh continent, they would show contempt and ridicule. The Divine Lord could clearly feel the contempt of the fifth continent's young man. When he heard this, the Divine Lord's eyes grew even colder. However, the young man from the fifth continent acted as if he didn't see it and continued to humiliate the seventh continent even more. Sigh, I thought it was a prodigy from the other six continents. I didn't expect it to be the seventh continent. Forget it. There's no point in being on such a trashy continent. Let's go back. When they heard that it was the seventh continent, the young men from the fifth continent instantly lost interest. It was as if even speaking to someone from the seventh continent was shameful. The people from the seventh continent burned with anger in the face of the fifth continent's mockery and humiliation. The Divine Lord, Tian Mushi, and Long Yang all had a cold glint in their eyes. However, as soon as the young man from the fifth continent finished speaking and was about to leave with his people, an indifferent voice suddenly rang out. As the saying goes, how can a wild dog know the terror of a lion? Why did the Hachibara Sankai place the gate to the immortal domain on the seventh continent? Why didn't they place it on the fifth continent, the fourth continent, or the third continent? I think it's because the other continents are too weak. If they place it on the seventh continent, as long as they take over the seventh continent, it would be equivalent to taking over the entire seventh realm. Hit the snake where it hurts. It looks like the people from the Hachibara Sankai aren't fools. They know that they have to attack the strongest continent, so they have to hit the seventh realm's vital point. As soon as the voice rang out, Xiao Chun slowly walked out from the crowd, dressed in white robes. He arrived in front of the young man from the fifth continent with a faint smile on his face. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1550. Xiao Chan was clearly implying that the other continents were weaker than the seventh continent, which was why the Hachibara Sankai had placed the celestial domain gate on the seventh continent. That one sentence instantly caused the face of the God Clan prodigy from the fifth mainland to darken. He was just about to leave when he stopped and turned to look at Xiao Chan. Traces of coldness gathered in his eyes as he said in a low voice, "Don't worry. You're the first chosen of the seventh continent?" When Xiao Chan stepped forward, the God-raised prodigy thought that Xiao Chan was the first chosen of the seventh continent. Xiao Chan was about to shake his head and deny it. After all, Xiao Chan was indeed not the first on the seventh continent's saint ranking. Moreover, Xiao Chan did not care about false titles, so he had no intention of pretending to be anyone. However, just as Xiao Chan was about to speak, the Divine Lord spoke first. "That's right, he's the first chosen of the seventh continent, Xiao Chan." The Divine Lord spoke first. Long Yang also stretched his neck and said, "That's right, he's the first chosen of the seventh continent." The two spoke one after the other. The others naturally did not have any objections. After all, there's almost no difference in strength between Xiao Chun and the other three on the seventh continent. There was no problem at all for anyone to be the first chosen. They turned to look helplessly at the Divine Lord and Long Yang. At the same time, the fifth continent's sacred race prodigy sneered and said, "A human can be the first chosen? It seems that the seventh continent is only SOSO. How pitiful. I'm the first chosen of the fifth continent, Song Yun." Song Yun was the number one chosen saint of the fifth mainland. Xiao Chun glanced at him nonchalantly. Xiao Chun was not interested in paying any attention at Song Yun at first, but Song Yun had a foul mouth and mocked the seventh mainland right off the bat. As someone from the seventh mainland, Xiao Chun naturally could not remain silent. When he heard Song Yun's mockery again, Xiao Chun suddenly revealed a smile and said with a warm expression, "Actually, I've always felt that fists are more useful than mouths, especially when faced with some despicable people. If you use your mouth to reason with them, they might not listen. However, if you use your fist to beat them up, everything will be resolved." So, at this point, a surge of aura suddenly surged from Xiao Chen's body. He had already reached the greater mastery of the quasi-saint stage. That's right. After cultivating with the Wine Taoist for 5 years, Xiao Qin's cultivation had reached the greater mastery of the quasi-saint stage, and he was at the limit of the greater mastery stage, was only a step away from the lesser perfection stage. Sensing Xiao Qin's aura, the Divine Lord, Tian Mushi, and Long Yang all smiled wryly. Long Yang even pretended to be wronged as he spoke. I knew it. I knew that this guy is a freak. Look, hasn't he already overtaken us? In the past 5 years, the three of them had also reached the greater mastery stage of the quasi-saint stage. However, compared to Xiao Qin, the three of them had just entered the greater mastery stage of the quasi-saint stage. On the other hand, Xiao Qin had already reached the limits of the greater mastery stage of the quasi-saint stage. Although they were at the same level, there was still a gap between them. Besides, judging from the current situation, Xiao Qin would definitely break through to the lesser perfection stage of the quasi-saint stage faster than them. This way, the gap between them would be truly widened. Upon hearing Long Yang's words, the Divine Lord and Tian Mushi didn't answer. However, there were traces of astonishment in their eyes. It was indeed too terrifying. Even the Divine Lord and Tian Mushi were a little shocked by this speed of improvement. However, Xiao Qin obviously didn't give the three of them too much time to be shocked. Because of the eruption of his aura, Xiao Qin said faintly, "Therefore, most of the time, I prefer to reason with my fists. This is not only simple, but also saves trouble. It also allows you to patiently listen to me." After saying that, Xiao Qin took a step forward. This was a brand new movement technique. Looking at its grade, it had obviously reached the Saint grade high grade. It was called the Mysterious Sky Steps. With one step, Xiao Qin's figure instantly appeared in front of Song Yun. Then, without any explanation, he blasted out a punch. The tempered battle physique erupted. Golden light gathered on the fist and blasted towards Song Yun with incomparable power. Cracks appeared in the space at this moment. The power of this punch made Song Yun's face sink. He didn't expect Xiao Qin to actually attack directly. What kind of joke was this? Didn't he look at where he was? He actually attacked directly? He had underestimated Xiao Qin's craziness. However, since things had already come to this, Song Yun had no choice but to resist. He also blasted out a punch and collided with Xiao Qin's fist. With a loud bang, a terrifying aftershock spread out wildly. As the two of them exchanged blows, the commotion naturally attracted the surrounding prodigies of the other continents. At this moment, in the first mainland's camp, a young man from the demon clan who was leading the group looked at Xiao Qin and Song Yun, who were fighting, with an excited smile on his face. Interesting. That human strength is not bad. He's at the peak of the paramount quasi-saint realm. Why are they fighting? Sigh. Can't they just get along peacefully? The young man from a Huang-Yi clan who was leading the group from the second mainland's camp shook his head and smiled bitterly. F***CK. Can't you guys greet us first? Look at this plate of meat of mine. It's all ruined by you guys. The young man from the barbarian clan who was leading the group from the third mainland's camp shouted angrily. At the same time, he was holding a whole roasted demonic beast's hind leg in his hand. However, the demonic beast's hind leg, which should have looked and smelled delicious, was already covered in dust at this moment. The terrifying aftershock spread out wildly, and Xiao Qin and Song Yun instantly became the center of attention of everyone present. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were looking at the two of them at this moment. However, in the face of everyone's gazes, Xiao Qin didn't change much, but a hint of surprise flashed across Song Yun's eyes. This strength is simply too great. He was secretly shocked. The two fists collided head-on. The terrifying strength that came from Xiao Qin's fist made Song Yun secretly shocked. As a human, the strength of his physical body was no weaker than that of the barbarian clan. After the two fists collided, both of them were forced back at the same time. However, everyone present was a prodigy of the various continents, so their eyesight was naturally extraordinary. Anyone could see that Song Yun was at a disadvantage in this exchange of fists. Xiao Qin retreated 3 steps, but Song Yun retreated a total of 5 steps. In terms of strength and physical body, Song Yun was no match for Xiao Chun. Feeling the faint numbness that kept coming from his right hand, Song Yun no longer had the slightest bit of disdain and ridicule. Instead, he had a solemn expression, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1551. Although he had only exchanged one blow with Xiao Chun, Song Yun no longer dared to underestimate his opponent. Xiao Chun was indeed not weak, and Song Yun did not dare to be careless. However, it was obviously impossible for Song Yun to back down with just this. Although Xiao Chun was strong, Song Yun was not weak either. Moreover, the geniuses of the 7 continents were present. If Song Yun backed down, he would not only lose face for himself, but also for the entire 5th mainland. He absolutely could not back down, even if he had to fight Xiao Chun. Moreover, it was not certain who would emerge victorious in the end. Song Yun thought to himself. However, just as he made up his mind, the dustless sword appeared in Xiao Chen's hand. With the dustless sword in hand, Xiao Chen's aura became even sharper. Sensing Xiao Chen's increasingly powerful aura, as well as the terrifying power of the sword domain that surrounded him, Song Yun's eyebrows twitched uncontrollably as he thought to himself in disbelief. This guy is a sword cultivator? Xiao Chun was naturally a sword cultivator, but Song Yun did not know that. When he had exchanged blows with Xiao Chun earlier, Song Yun had only thought that Xiao Chun was a body cultivator with a powerful physical body. However, Xiao Chun was not a body cultivator, but a sword cultivator. In other words, Xiao Chen's strongest point was not his fist, but the long sword in his hand. How could a sword cultivator have such a powerful physical body? For a moment, Song Yun's fear of Xiao Chun rose to another level. Song Yun was not the only one who felt the same way. Everyone else present looked at Xiao Chun with a dustless sword in his hand. The geniuses of the other continents were also watching this scene with great interest. Under everyone's gaze, Xiao Chun did not hesitate at all. He immediately unleashed his sword domain, which instantly enveloped Song Yun. 5 years had passed, and Xiao Chen's sword domain was completely different from 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Xiao Chen's sword domain was only at the advanced realm. 5 years later, Xiao Chen's sword domain had reached the small perfection realm. It was much, much stronger than before. Moreover, Xiao Chen's sword domain was now displaying the true power of a domain. Within the sword domain, Xiao Chun could control everything. With just a thought, the endless sword energy would madly attack Song Yun. Just like now, when he was enveloped by the sword domain, Song Yun was faced with the endless sword domain's attacks. With Song Yun's strength, it was not a problem for him to block the sword chi. However, it would not be so easy for Song Yun to deal with Xiao Chen's next attack. Within the sword domain, Xiao Chen's strength had increased tremendously. With a slash of his sword, a green sword radiance flashed past. The Green Lotus Sword Chi was a set of upper sage class martial skills that Wine Taoist had imparted to Xiao Chun. Its power was much, much stronger than the sun-scorching sword technique. Moreover, under Wine Taoist guidance, Xiao Chun had already cultivated the Green Lotus Sword Chi to the perfection realm in 5 years. The green sword radiance flashed past. Seeing this, Song Yun did not have time to think. He immediately pointed his finger and unleashed the divine clan's superpower. A golden radiance flashed past and then violently collided with the Green Lotus Sword Chi. This time, the collision between the two was much more powerful than the previous one. The space directly collapsed, and the ground beneath their feet cracked inch by inch. Fortunately, the people present were all geniuses from various continents. None of them were weak. Otherwise, this collision would have affected many people. After another collision, Xiao Chun took the initiative to attack. He leaped up and instantly engaged in a fierce battle with Song Yun. Xiao Chen's combat strength was completely different when he attacked and when he did not attack. Previously, Xiao Chun had only thrown out a punch. However, at this time, with the dustless sword in hand, Xiao Qin's attack strength could be said to have been raised to a whole new level. One could imagine the pressure that Song Yun was under in the fierce battle with Xiao Chun. Although Song Yun's strength did not mean that he could not contend with Xiao Chun, now was not the time to fight to the death. To be honest, Song Yun did not intend to fight with Xiao Chun. However, in the face of Xiao Qin's attack, Song Yun did not dare to underestimate it. This was because once he relaxed, he might be injured by Xiao Chun. He was forced to fight fiercely with Xiao Chun. Moreover, he was already using his full strength. Many of the geniuses present looked thoughtful as they watched the fierce battle between the two of them. In the beginning, the two of them were evenly matched. It seemed that neither of them could do anything to the other. However, as time passed, Song Yun was gradually suppressed by Xiao Chun. With the tempered battle body, Xiao Chun was not afraid of exchanging blows with Song Yun. At first, Song Yun did not know how terrifying the tempered battle body was and dared to fight with Xiao Chun. However, later on, when the two of them fought at the same time, Xiao Chun's injuries could be healed in an instant. Song Yun had the urge to curse when he saw this scene. F***CK, isn't this cheating? Everyone was injured, but you F***king healed in an instant. After knowing that Xiao Chun had the ability to heal in an instant, Song Yun did not dare to fight with Xiao Chun head-on. What a joke. Fighting with someone who had the ability to heal in an instant? Wasn't that just asking for trouble? It was precisely because he did not dare to exchange blows with Xiao Chun that Song Yun was forced into a passive position most of the time. As a result, he was gradually suppressed by Xiao Chun. After being suppressed by Xiao Chun, Song Yun became more and more grieved. In fact, Song Yun still had a trump card that he had not used yet. However, that was his real trump card, and it should only be used at the most critical moment. Since the battle with Xiao Chun was completely meaningless, Song Yun did not want to use such a trump card. There were still sky prides from other continents present, and it would not be good news for him to expose his trump card. Of course, Song Yun also suspected that Xiao Chun also had a trump card that he had not used yet. If that was the case, even if he used his trump card, he would not be able to do anything to Xiao Chun. The two of them fought fiercely. Seeing that Xiao Chun was suppressing Song Yun, Long Yang, who was not far away, took the opportunity to mock. TSK, I thought you were something. Turns out you're just a guy who looks strong on the outside, but is weak on the inside. Long Yang had no intention of hiding his words. Naturally, the geniuses from the Fifth Mainland heard it as well. In an instant, the geniuses from the Fifth Mainland glared at the Fifth Mainland. Sensing the cold gazes from the Fifth Mainland, the Divine Lord said indifferently, "If you want to fight, then fight. The Seventh Mainland will definitely accompany you to the end." Xiao Chun had suppressed Song Yun. In terms of momentum, the Seventh Mainland was obviously suppressing the Fifth Mainland. However, just as the Divine Lord finished speaking, a powerful force appeared out of nowhere and forcibly separated Xiao Chun and Song Yun, begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1552. The sudden arrival of this power forced Xiao Chun and Song Yun apart. Then, the will of heaven and earth, Wine Taoist, and several other experts appeared in the sky. Apart from the will of the heavenly way, there were dozens of immortal realm experts. Xiao Chun only knew Wine Taoist and a few others. As for the others, they were probably immortal realm experts from the other 6 continents. After all, there were 7 continents in the 7th realm. It was impossible that only the 7th continent had immortal realm experts. When everyone appeared, the will of the heavenly ways in different voice sounded. Now is not the time for you to fight. Xiao Chun and Song Yun chose to stop fighting. Song Yun couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. If they continued fighting just now, he would have to use his trump card. After the will of the heavenly way and the other immortal realm experts appeared, the hundreds of young geniuses present quietened down. Everyone was waiting for the will of the heavenly way to speak. After all, no one knew why they were brought here. Facing everyone's gaze, the will of the heavenly way didn't beat around the bush and spoke directly. All of you have been trained by immortal realm experts. Your cultivation has improved a lot in the past 5 years. Today, all of you are gathered here for the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm. All of the young geniuses present have been specially trained by immortal realm experts in the past 5 years. Whether it was talent or combat strength, they could be said to be the top group of people in the seventh realm. And today, they were gathered here for the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm. Many of the young geniuses present had never heard of the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm. Fortunately, the will of the Heavenly Way explained it to everyone. The Northern Underworld Immortal Realm had always been a top-secret realm in the seventh realm. It wasn't a secret realm that appeared artificially, but was born with the birth of heaven and earth. The Northern Underworld Immortal Realm contained many heavenly treasures. But most importantly, there was an immortal crystal spirit vein in the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm that could help people break through to the Immortal Realm. Hearing that the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm could help people break through to the Immortal Realm, many of the young geniuses present were secretly excited. Ever since they learned that the Immortal Realm was above the Great Sage Realm, the young geniuses present had long set their sights on the Immortal Realm. After all, with their talent, they should have no problem breaking through to the Great Sage Realm as long as they didn't die. With their talent, they should have no problem breaking through to the Great Sage Realm. However, the Immortal Realm was different. Immortal Realm was of Immortal Realm. Immortal Realm was different. Realm was Immortal Realm Immortal was. Immortal Realm Immortal Realm was. Immortal Realm Realm was. Realm was. From the of, was of the of Immortal Realm. For Underworld is. Of the immortal of the of course. Were. He of and of great immortal. But the immortal crystal spirit vein in the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm is only enough for one person to break through to the Immortal Realm. Moreover, your opponents this time are not only each other. It was the first time for the young geniuses to know about the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm. The reason why the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm was open this time was because the will of the Heavenly Way had no other choice. Because the Hachibara Sunkai had built the gate of the Immortal Realm on the seventh continent, the seventh realm had fallen into a disadvantageous position. Now, the Hachibara Sunkai's realm lord, Luo Li, who was in charge of attacking the seventh wilderness, had approached the will of the Heavenly Way. In exchange for the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm, the will of the Heavenly Way agreed not to open the gate of the Immortal Realm for the time being. The will of the Heavenly Way naturally understood Luo Li's request. Every realm in the Hachibara Sunkai had a realm lord and an heir. An heir was similar to a saint. However, there was only one heir in each realm in the Hachibara Sunkai. Therefore, in terms of strength, an heir would definitely surpass many saints in the seventh wilderness. In the eyes of the will of the Heavenly Way, including the Divine Lord and the others, they were all inferior to the heir of the seventh realm. This was because the heir's cultivation level had already reached the lesser completion of the quasi-saint realm. The will of the Heavenly Way had seen this with his own eyes. Now, Luo Li proposed that the will of the Heavenly Way open the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm and allow the heir of the seventh realm to enter. There was only one purpose: to let the heir of the seventh realm use the immortal crystal spirit vein in the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm to break through to the Immortal Realm. This was Luo Li's plan. Naturally, the will of the Heavenly Way was unwilling to give up the immortal crystal spirit vein so easily. Therefore, after some bargaining, the two sides finally reached an agreement. The will of the Heavenly Way could open the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm, but the seventh wilderness would also send people in. To put it simply, the will of the Heavenly Way would open the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm. The seventh wilderness and the Hachibara Sunkai would each send no more than 500 young talents in. At that time, the immortal crystal spirit vein would belong to each of them. It could be said that the will of the heavenly way had to make a huge concession because of the gate of the immortal realm. Otherwise, the will of the heavenly way would never open the northern underworld immortal realm. After all, the immortal crystal spirit vein in the northern underworld immortal realm was formed after millions of years of evolution. There was only one immortal crystal spirit vein in the entire seventh wilderness. He told everyone about the northern underworld immortal realm. Many young geniuses were stunned when they heard this. They didn't expect that the northern underworld immortal realm would be competing with the younger generation of the eight desolates immortal world. Moreover, so many people entered the northern underworld immortal realm, but only one person could break through to the immortal realm. One could imagine how fierce the competition would be. Moreover, the situation in the seventh wilderness was different from that in the seventh realm. Because the seventh realm only had one heir, even if they sent other young talents in, they would definitely follow the heir's lead. If the seventh realm won, the immortal crystal spirit vein would definitely belong to the heir. In comparison, the young geniuses from the seventh wasteland were different. They didn't have anyone who could convince them. In other words, the young geniuses from the seventh wasteland not only had to face the young geniuses from the seventh world, but they also had to compete with their peers because no one wanted to give up on the celestial crystal vein. It was indeed very stressful. However, many people had doubts in their hearts. After a short moment of shock, Xiao Chun looked at the will of the heavenly way and asked, "The immortal crystal spirit vein can only allow one person to enter the immortal realm. Moreover, there is only one immortal crystal spirit vein in the entire seventh wilderness. In that case, how did the wine Taoist and the others break through to the immortal realm?" Xiao Chun had this question in his heart. This was indeed not right. If the immortal crystal spirit vein could only allow one person to enter the immortal realm, how did the wine Taoist and the others enter the immortal realm? This did not make sense. One should know that there were no less than 50 immortal realm almighties standing in front of everyone. How do they break through? Please add, vote, recommend. Chapter 1553. Since there was only one immortal crystal spirit vein in the seventh wilderness, and it could only allow one person to break through to the immortal realm, how did wine Taoist and the rest become immortal crystal spirit veins? One had to know that there was more than one immortal realm expert in the seventh wilderness. Moreover, although there were more than 50 immortal realm experts present, they were obviously not all of the immortal realm experts in the seventh wilderness. After so many years, the number of immortal realm experts in the seventh wilderness had almost reached 1,000. In that case, how did they break through to the immortal realm? Xiao Chun raised the question in his mind. Of course, it wasn't only Xiao Chun who had this question. Many people present had the same question. After hearing Xiao Chun's question, the will of the heavenly way didn't intend to hide it. He smiled and said, "In this world, there are a total of 2 ways to break through to the immortal realm. There were 2 ways to break through to the immortal realm. The first way was through the heavenly stone that everyone was most familiar with. The heavenly stone was an extremely magical treasure that was nurtured by nature and grew extremely slowly. It took at least 10,000 years for a heavenly stone to form, and that was the shortest time. With enough heavenly stones and the help of the will of the heavenly way, a warrior could break through to the immortal realm. This was also the most common way to break through to the immortal realm. However, using the heavenly stone to break through to the immortal realm, when the Dantian transformed into an immortal mansion, it would form an earth immortal mansion. The immortal crystal spirit vein was the second way to break through to the immortal realm. Compared to the heavenly stone, the immortal crystal spirit vein was many times more precious and contained much more energy. Therefore, using the immortal crystal spirit vein to break through to the immortal realm, when the Dantian transformed into an immortal mansion, it would form a heavenly immortal mansion. At this point, many of the young geniuses present were confused because they had never come into contact with an immortal mansion before. To put it bluntly, the immortal mansion was the symbol of the immortal realm expert. As everyone knew, The place that warriors used to store and refine spiritual energy was called the Danteon. Once one broke through to the immortal realm, the Danteon would transform into an immortal mansion. The immortal mansion had the same effect as the Danteon. However, compared to the Danteon, the immortal mansion was much, much stronger. Whether it was the speed of refining spiritual chi or the explosive power during battle, it was far from what the Danteon could compare with. One of them was in the sky, while the other was on the ground like clouds and mud. It could be understood this way. The immortal palace was the product of the Danteon's transformation. It was more powerful and also more heaven-defying. Although the Earth Immortal Manor and the Heaven Immortal Manor were both immortal mansions, there was a huge gap between them. For example, a person who used the Heavenly Lost Stone to break through to the immortal realm and condense the Earth Immortal Mansion was facing a person who used the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein to break through to the immortal realm and condense the Heavenly Immortal Mansion. Although both of them were in the immortal realm, there was no comparison. An immortal realm expert with a heavenly immortal mansion could deal with at least 10 immortal realm experts with earthly immortal mansions at the same time. This was the difference between the two. Of course, although the heavenly immortal mansion was powerful, the immortal crystal spirit vein was extremely rare. Therefore, even if one searched the entire 8 wastelands, there would not be many immortal realm experts who could possess a heavenly immortal mansion. As far as the will of the heavenly way knew, in the entire 7th realm of the Hachibusa Senkai, only the realm lord Luo Li had a heavenly immortal mansion. It was because of the heavenly immortal mansion that Luo Li had the strength to contend with the will of the heavenly way. As for the 7th wasteland, there was not a single immortal realm expert who possessed a heavenly immortal mansion. After all, there was only one immortal crystal spirit vein in the 7th wasteland. Until now, the will of the heavenly way was reluctant to use it. After knowing the 2 methods to break through to the immortal realm, it could be said that the difference between these 2 methods was like heaven and earth. The difference between using the heavenly lost stone and using the immortal crystal spirit vein to break through to the immortal realm was so great. Unfortunately, the immortal crystal spirit vein was too rare. Therefore, it was destined that the number of immortal realm experts who could possess a heavenly immortal mansion would not be large. It could even be said that they were extremely rare. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Chun was excited. Immortal crystal spirit vein and heavenly immortal mansion. He did not expect that breaking through to the immortal realm would require such attention. However, with Xiao Chen's character, since he already knew about the immortal crystal spirit vein and the heavenly immortal mansion, Xiao Chen naturally had no interest in using the heavenly lost stone to break through to the immortal realm. Since he was on a fight for it, he naturally had to fight for the best. After eating all the delicacies, it was obviously not good to eat cabbage. A look of determination flashed in his eyes. Xiao Chun was determined to fight for the immortal crystal spirit vein in the northern underworld immortal realm. No matter who his opponent was, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, Xiao Chun would not give up. Just as Xiao Chun secretly made up his mind, Long Yang came to Xiao Chen's side and said with a smile, "Why? Are you tempted by the immortal crystal spirit vein?" But this time, the opponent is not weak. Not to mention the heir of the 7th realm. Just look at us, the geniuses of the 7th wilderness, who are all extremely jealous. No matter what, we have to fight for it. Brother Long Yang, don't you think so too? Hearing this, Xiao Chen replied with a smile. The opponent was very strong, and the competition was indeed fierce. Even so, Xiao Chen had no reason to give up. After knowing the whole story, as well as the matter of the heavenly immortal mansion and the earth immortal mansion, Will of the Heavenly Way said indifferently, "Okay, let's begin the northern underworld immortal realm. After entering, I hope that you can unite. No matter who the immortal crystal spirit vein belongs to in the end, don't forget that the 7th realm is your common enemy." With that, the Will of the Heavenly Way used his mind, and a light gate appeared in front of everyone. This was the entrance to the northern underworld immortal realm. At the same time, not only here, but above the black palace of the seventh realm, a light gate also appeared. According to the agreement, the will of the heavenly way opened two entrances. One was here, and the other was in the black palace of the seventh realm. With the appearance of the light gate in the black palace of the seventh realm, hundreds of black-robed young men who had already gathered here were all excited. However, they knew very well that the immortal crystal spirit vein in the northern underworld immortal realm would not belong to them. It belonged to the heir of the seventh realm. Just as the black-robed young men were secretly suppressing the excitement in their hearts, a young man in a gray cloth inexplicably appeared in the field. The young man's clothes were very simple, without the slightest sense of luxury. He was very plain, just like an ordinary scholar, and his appearance was very elegant. His skin was fair and clean, and it was ordinary. No one could see anything special about him. However, when the young man appeared and stood in front of you, you would involuntarily feel an indescribable pressure from his body. It was constantly oppressing your mind. This young man in gray was naturally the heir of the seventh realm. His name was Yushu Jin. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1554. Yushu Jin, the seventh heir of the Hachibara Senkai, was also one of the 8 heirs of the Hachibara Senkai. Looking at the light gate in front of her, Yushu Jin's eyes were burning with passion. Those who were familiar with Yushu Jin knew that she had always been very calm and composed. At a young age, she had a temperament that would not change her expression even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of her. But now, even Yushu Jin could not help but feel the passion in her heart. One could imagine how attractive the holy crystal spiritual vein was. Of course, Yushu Jin would lose her composure. On one hand, it was because of the preciousness of the holy crystal spiritual vein. On the other hand, the other 7 heirs of the Hachibara Senkai had broken through to the immortal realm and condensed the celestial immortal mansion. Only Yushu Jin had not broken through to the immortal realm because she had not found the holy crystal spiritual vein. Speaking of this, there was still one more thing to add. That was another heaven-defying aspect of the holy crystal spiritual vein. As long as one could obtain the holy crystal spiritual vein and the cultivation had reached the sage realm, then the pure energy in the holy crystal spiritual vein could help the warrior break through to the great sage realm great perfection without any hindrance, and then directly break through to the immortal realm. This was why people like Xiao Chun and Yushu Jin were so excited about the holy crystal spiritual vein, even though their cultivations were only in the quasi-saint realm. Because as long as they could obtain the holy crystal spiritual vein, it would not be a problem for them to reach the great saint realm. Yushu Jin exhaled. Among the 8 heirs of the Hachibara Senkai, only Yushu Jin had not broken through to the immortal realm and condensed the celestial immortal mansion. Therefore, this time, Yushu Jin was determined to get it. Anyone who dared to stop her would die. Let's go. Saying softly, Yushu Jin took the lead and stepped into the light gate. Then, a group of black-robed youths from the 7th realm followed closely behind. These black-robed youths were either the children of the strong people of the 7th realm or some talented youths that the 7th realm had specially found and carefully cultivated. In terms of strength, they were definitely not weaker than the saints of the 7th wilderness. Many young geniuses from the 7th realm entered the northern underworld celestial realm under Yushu Jin's lead. On the other side, Xiao Chun and the others did the same. After everyone entered the northern underworld celestial realm, the eyes of the heavenly way flashed with a hint of seriousness. The ownership of the immortal crystal spirit vein would depend on these little guys' abilities. The will of the heavenly way could not interfere with whether they could stop Yushu Jin, the heir of the 7th realm. The door of light slowly closed. Apart from the will of the heavenly way, the dozens of 7th wilderness immortal realm mighty figures all looked solemn. Naturally, they did not want the immortal crystal spirit vein to fall into the hands of the 7th realm. Otherwise, if you Shu Jin obtained the immortal crystal spirit vein and formed the heavenly immortal mansion, it would be a huge blow to the seventh wilderness. The immortal realm mighty figures and the will of the heavenly way all had heavy hearts. However, at this moment, Shao Chun and the others had already entered the northern underworld celestial realm through the door of light. As soon as they entered, as far as the eye could see, spiritual treasures of heaven and earth could be seen everywhere. Many of them were extinct in the outside world. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth was extremely dense, and there were so many spiritual treasures of heaven and earth. It was no exaggeration to say that any of these spiritual treasures of heaven and earth in the northern underworld celestial realm could be said to be priceless. Some people's eyes were burning with passion. However, at this moment, the first saint from the first continent spoke first. Everyone, this is just a drizzle. The most important thing is the immortal crystal spirit vein. We can't lose the big picture for the small. The immortal crystal spirit vein was the most precious treasure in the northern underworld celestial realm. Moreover, the heir of the seventh realm should have entered the northern underworld celestial realm by now. It was not wise to waste time here. Fighting for the immortal crystal spirit vein was the most important thing. Hearing the words of the first saint from the first continent, everyone present suppressed the excitement in their hearts. Then, the first saints from each continent naturally gathered together to discuss how to deal with the seventh realm. On the seventh continent side, the Divine Lord, Tian Mushi, and Long Yang unanimously agreed that Shao Chun was the first saint of the seventh continent. It was not that the three of them were modest. From the previous battle between Shao Chun and Song Yun, Shao Chun's strength had indeed surpassed the three of them. Therefore, Shao Chun deserved the title of first saint. He was completely pushed out by the three of them. There was no other way. Shao Chun could only gather with the first saints of the other continents. Facing Shao Chun, Song Yun was obviously full of hostility. However, other than him, the other 5 people were quite amiable. Perhaps because they had seen Shao Chun's combat strength, the other 5 did not want to provoke Shao Chun for no reason. Therefore, when they saw Shao Chun, they all smiled and nodded as a greeting. After a simple introduction, the first saint of the first continent spoke first. Everyone, the will of the heavenly way is right. The seventh realm is our true opponent. Therefore, I think that before we deal with the seventh realm, we should unite. Otherwise, we will only let the enemy take advantage of us. Regardless of whether there was only one immortal crystal spirit vein or not, and regardless of the treasures on the ground, the most important thing now was to destroy the people of the seventh realm. In the face of an external enemy, it would be foolish to still fight among themselves. As for how to distribute the immortal crystal spirit vein in the end, and who would take it, that would be a matter for after the seventh realm was defeated. This was the first saint of the first continent's intention. Hearing this, no one had any objections. Shao Chun also nodded in agreement. After all, with an external enemy in front of them, if the young prodigies of the 7 continents still fought among themselves, the gains would not make up for the losses. Since they had the same opinion, the 7 of them also reached a temporary agreement to join forces. Before the seventh realm was defeated, the young prodigies of the 7 continents must unite. As for the treasures in front of them, after some discussion, the 7 of them finally decided not to care about them for the time being. They should head directly to the immortal crystal spirit vein to prevent the 7th realm from getting it first. Anyway, they would face the 7th realm sooner or later. What was the difference between earlier and later? Moreover, if they could really defeat the prodigies of the 7th realm, then the treasures in the entire northern underworld celestial realm would be up for everyone to distribute. They would ignore the treasures in front of them and head directly to the immortal crystal spirit vein. In this regard, everyone unanimously agreed. Then, the young prodigies of the 7 continents temporarily united. Then, under the leadership of Shao Chun and the other first saints, they went straight to the immortal crystal spirit vein. There was no delay along the way. They even ignored the precious treasures when they saw them. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1555. The northern underworld celestial realm wasn't that big, and the immortal crystal spiritual vein wasn't hard to find. Above the immortal crystal spiritual vein, there was always a five-colored light shrouding it. As long as one moved in the direction of the five-colored light, it was easy to find the immortal crystal spiritual vein. They didn't stop along the way. Many young geniuses from the seventh wilderness quickly rushed towards the immortal crystal spiritual vein. At the same time, Yushujin also led the young geniuses from the seventh realm towards the immortal crystal spiritual vein. Both sides had the same idea. Whether it was Xiao Chun and the others from the seventh wilderness or Yu Shu Yao and the others from the seventh realm, they didn't care about the treasures in this place. In their eyes, no treasure could be compared with the immortal crystal spiritual vein. Moreover, in the current situation, as long as they could get the immortal crystal spiritual vein, the other treasures would naturally be at their fingertips. The two sides entered the northern underworld celestial realm from different entrances, but their goal was the same. That was the immortal crystal spiritual vein. Moreover, they started to act immediately. The northern underworld celestial realm wasn't big, so it didn't take long for Xiao Chun and the other young geniuses from the seventh wilderness to reach the entrance of the immortal crystal spiritual vein. A light gate formed by five-colored light was the entrance to the immortal crystal spiritual vein. As long as one entered through this gate, they would reach the heavenly spiritual vein. Of course, this light gate could only allow one person to pass through. Once someone passed through, the light gate would automatically disappear and no one else would be able to enter. Seeing that the light gate was intact, Xiao Chun and the others heaved a sigh of relief. This meant that the people from the seventh realm hadn't arrived yet. Logically speaking, Yu Shujin from the seventh realm hadn't arrived at the immortal crystal spiritual vein. Therefore, the best way was to let someone enter the immortal crystal spiritual vein first. In this way, even if Yu Shujin arrived with the others, he wouldn't be able to enter the immortal crystal spiritual vein. However, there was a very serious problem in front of everyone. That was, who should they let in first? The hundreds of young geniuses from the seventh wilderness all wanted to obtain the immortal crystal spiritual vein to form the heavenly immortal mansion and enter the immortal realm. Therefore, no one was willing to give in. Therefore, no one could enter. It was impossible to give up the immortal crystal spiritual vein so easily, and the others. As a result, everyone was delayed. At this moment, Yu Shujin had arrived with the people from the seventh realm. Yu Shujin, who was the leader, said indifferently. Yu Shujin, who was the leader, said, who was the leader, to said. Who was Shujin, who was the leaders said. The people, was the was said, s was this, who was to enter, est, ss, s's was. Actually, the people of the seventh wilderness couldn't be blamed for this. Everyone knew the logic, but no one would willingly give up such a great opportunity in front of them. No one would agree. Humans die for wealth, and birds die for food. That was why the prodigies from the seventh wilderness didn't mind Yu Shujin's words. After all, they were going to fight Yu Shujin and the others anyway. The first saint of the second continent stepped forward. He looked at Yu Shujin coldly and shouted, "You're the heir of the seventh realm." It was their first time dealing with the seventh realm, so they didn't know what Yu Shujin looked like. Yu Shujin replied indifferently, "You're about to die. Why do you need to know so much?" Yu Shujin looked down on the seventh wilderness saints from the bottom of her heart. Her words were full of disdain. Everyone present was the top of the younger generation in the seventh wilderness. They were all proud and arrogant. Anger flashed across many of their eyes when faced with the disdain of their peers. Yu Shujin was like a high and mighty emperor. She was looking down on the seventh wilderness's geniuses. Many people couldn't accept this. However, Yu Shujin's indifference and disdain were not false bravado. On the contrary, Yu Shujin really had such strength. At least, there was one person in the seventh wilderness who had reached the lesser perfection of the second sage realm. In other words, Yu Shujin wouldn't be afraid of anyone in a one-on-one battle. She had a high chance of winning. After all, there was a difference in cultivation. Xiao Chun was probably the one whose combat strength was closest to Yu Shujin's. This was because Xiao Qin's cultivation was now at the peak of the greater mastery of the quasi-saint realm, which was slightly higher than the other first saints. Moreover, Xiao Qin's combat strength was already very strong. Previously, he was able to suppress the Fifth Mainland's first saint, Songyun. Therefore, Xiao Chun was probably the one whose combat strength was closest to Yu Shujin's among the Seventh Wilderness Heaven's prides. Even so, Xiao Chun didn't have much chance of winning against Yu Shujin. To be honest, Xiao Chun didn't have much of a chance of winning. Yu Shujin didn't care when she sensed the anger in the eyes of the Seventh Wilderness geniuses. She still said matter-of-factly, "You don't have the right to be angry if you're not strong enough. Weakness is the original sin." This was Yu Shujin's catchphrase. As soon as she finished speaking, she paused for a moment. Then, she ordered the people of the Seventh World softly, "Do it. Kill all these ants." She didn't even seem interested in attacking. Upon hearing this, the hundreds of young geniuses from the Seventh Realm beside Yu Shujin sneered. At the same time, a terrifying aura surged from their bodies. Their cultivation had reached the Saint Realm. The weakest among them had reached the lesser perfection of the Saint Realm. Moreover, many of them had already reached the Second Sage Realm. It could be said that these young geniuses from the Seventh Realm weren't any weaker than those from the Seventh Wilderness. Sensing the terrifying spiritual chi fluctuations, some people from the Seventh Wilderness looked solemn, while others were filled with battle intent. However, at this moment, Xiao Chun suddenly spoke. "We don't know how to divide the immortal crystal spiritual vein. How about this? The immortal crystal spiritual vein will belong to whoever kills Yu Shujin. Of course, if we lose, we won't be able to get the immortal crystal spiritual vein." Xiao Chun suddenly spoke when the battle was about to break out. Hearing this, the first saints from the other continents were stunned. However, they quickly regained their senses and nodded in agreement. "That's right. Xiao Chun's idea is good. It's fair. I don't think anyone will disagree. That's right. If we win, we'll see who kills Yu Shujin. If we lose, we don't need to think about anything else. After all, it's useless to say anything if we lose our lives. Please add vote recommend." Chapter 1556. The immortal crystal spiritual vein would belong to whoever killed Yu Shujin. Everyone expressed their support for Xiao Qin's proposal. After all, it was the fairest method. The first saints of various continents began to express their support. Then, hundreds of geniuses from the Seventh Wilderness also erupted with their terrifying power. For a moment, the geniuses from the two sides clashed. There were indeed a few geniuses from the Seventh Realm who were very strong. At least, they had reached the level of Sir God. The Divine Monarch, Tianmushi, Long Yang, and the other First Sacred Sons had already started fighting with the Seventh Realm's geniuses. However, there was no overwhelming scene. The Seventh Realm's geniuses weren't at a disadvantage at all. Both sides were locked in battle. Xiao Chun was also fighting fiercely with a genius from the Seventh Realm. This genius from the Seventh Realm had also reached the great completion of the Quasi-Saint Realm. Like Xiao Chun, his strength was extremely terrifying and was not any weaker than Long Yang. This time, those who could enter the northern underworld celestial realm with Yu Shujin were the most monstrous geniuses from the Seventh Realm. Therefore, their strength could not be underestimated. However, as soon as they entered the northern underworld celestial realm, a fierce battle broke out between the two sides. Haha, Seventh Wilderness Saint. Not bad. Interesting. The genius from the Seventh Realm who was fighting fiercely with Xiao Chun was a barbarian. He had a strong body and terrifying physical strength. Even if they were to compete purely on physical strength, Xiao Chun would be at a disadvantage. After a fierce battle, the genius from the Seventh Realm laughed loudly. He was also a little surprised by Xiao Chen's strength. It was indeed extraordinary that a human could cultivate his physical body to such a level. However, before he could finish speaking, Xiao Chen's dustless sword appeared in his hand with a thought. Seeing Shao Chen's dustless sword, the genius from the seventh realm was surprised. Shao Chen's physical body was terrifying, but he did not expect him to be a sword cultivator. Without wasting any time, Shao Chen took out his Wuqian sword. Then he slashed out with his sword. The green lotus sword chi was unleashed instantly and slashed towards the young man from the brute tribe. The cyan lotus sword chi was a holy skill of high quality. Of course, its power couldn't be underestimated. However, the young man from the barbarian tribe wasn't simple either. He didn't try to dodge the cyan lotus sword chi. Instead, he punched the cyan lotus sword chi. The cyan lotus sword chi was destroyed by the young man's punch. He had successfully blocked Shao Chen's green lotus sword chi. Moreover, he had blocked it head-on. The young man from the barbarian tribe withdrew the disdain in his eyes and spoke with a serious expression. "You're not bad. You are qualified to know my name. Remember, the person who killed you is called Meng. Meng. Although he wasn't as famous as Shu Jin in the younger generation of the Seventh Realm, it was no exaggeration to say that he was the #1 person below Shu Jin and the #2 genius of a younger generation of the Seventh Realm. Shao Chen didn't expect to fight with a #2 genius. Regarding this, he didn't know what to say. Should he say that he was lucky or unlucky? Meng didn't give Shao Chen too much time to think. He took a step forward and disappeared in an instant. Then, without any warning, Meng suddenly appeared behind Shao Chen and threw out a punch. Seeing this, Shao Chen dodged sideways and narrowly avoided Meng's attack. So fast, Shao Chen was secretly shocked. He didn't expect Meng to be so fast. Judging from his appearance, Meng was obviously a strength-type warrior. He was tall and muscular. Such a person was definitely powerful, but at the same time, it was inevitable that his movements would be somewhat clumsy. However, Meng was different. With his tall, muscular figure and powerful strength, his speed was absolutely fast. It could even be said that he was ridiculously fast. Meng didn't mind that his attack missed. He moved his feet and his figure shrunk again. Then, he appeared on Shao Chen's left side and threw out another punch. This time, Shao Chen had no space to dodge, so he could only thrust his sword forward to meet Meng's attack head-on. Both of them clashed head-on and were forced to retreat a few steps. Looking at this, Shao Chen's eyes glinted. This Meng was indeed difficult to deal with. Not only was his strength terrifying, but he could also cultivate his speed to such a high level. Compared to Shao Chen, Meng's battle intent was monstrous. He was very strong. In Meng's opinion, Shao Chen was very strong. However, it was precisely because of this that Meng was excited. It was already delightful to be able to fight with such a person. Therefore, looking at Shao Chen, Meng laughed heartily. Again. Having said that, Meng moved his feet and attacked again. Seeing this, Shao Chen didn't continue to defend passively this time. He performed the mysterious heavenly steps and also moved forward to fight with Meng. It was impossible to see their figures clearly. Both of them were extremely fast. Only 2 afterimages could be seen colliding in the air. Along with their collisions, a series of sonic booms sounded and layers of ripples appeared in the air. The mysterious heavenly steps was a set of body movement martial skills that Wine Taoist had taught Shao Chen. It was at the upper sacred level and was extremely fast. Moreover, after 5 years of practice, Shao Chen had already cultivated it to the perfection level, just like the green lotus sword chi. However, at this time, facing Meng, even though Shao Chen had performed the perfection level mysterious heavenly steps, he could only keep up with Meng's speed. He didn't have the slightest advantage. Logically speaking, Meng was from the barbarian tribe, so his speed shouldn't be very fast. After all, everyone knew that the barbarian tribe was known for their strength. In terms of bloodline, the barbarian tribe's speed was inferior to the other tribes. However, Meng made up for this shortcoming of his. Not only did he have the terrifying physical strength of the barbarian tribe, but he also had a speed that was not inferior to Shao Chen's. It could be said that Meng was a perfect existence. Strength was the barbarian tribe's strongest point, and speed was their weakest point. He had completely made up for his weakness as a barbarian tribe member. Shermeng had no other shortcomings. It was hard to imagine how Shermeng managed to cultivate to such a high speed. After all, as a member of the barbarian race, the amount of effort Shermeng had to put in to achieve such a speed was probably much more than the prodigies of the other races. After a fierce battle, Xiao Chun and Shermeng didn't hold back at all. However, until now, the two of them were still evenly matched. Neither of them had the upper hand. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1557. Their battle strength could be said to be evenly matched, and so was their cultivation. Shermeng's cultivation had also reached the limit of the advanced quasi-sage realm, and he was only one step away from the advanced quasi-sage realm. Their voices crisscrossed, and a series of sonic booms were heard. However, what was surprising was that the space where the two of them were fighting did not collapse. Not only was this the case for Xiao Chun and Shermeng, but it was also the case for the others. The space in the northern underworld immortal realm was much harder than the outside world. It was completely capable of withstanding the aftermath of a battle below the immortal realm. Therefore, although the battle was extremely intense, there were only some ripples in the space, and it did not collapse. At this time, Xiao Chun and Shermeng were already locked in a fierce battle. They only had each other in their eyes and would not pay attention to anything else. Both sides were locked in a fierce battle. Not only were Xiao Chun and Shermeng locked in a fierce battle, the others, such as the Divine Lord, Tianmushi, Long Yang, and the others were also locked in a fierce battle with their respective opponents. The only person who did not make a move was Yushu Jin. Watching the battle coldly, Yushu Jin's expression did not change from the beginning to the end. She still had an indifferent look on her face. Perhaps in Yushu Jin's eyes, no one in the fierce battle could be her opponent. Although the Divine Lord and the others were quite strong, there was still a gap between them and Yushu Jin. Yushu Jin seemed to be watching the development of the battle out of boredom. In the end, her gaze fell on Xiao Chun, who was fighting with Shermeng. In fact, Yushu Jin had already noticed Xiao Chun from the beginning. After all, Xiao Chun's opponent was Shermeng. Among all the younger generation in the seventh realm, Shermeng's combat strength was second only to Yushu Jin. Therefore, when she saw Xiao Chun and Shermeng fighting, Yushu Jin's first reaction was that Xiao Chun would definitely lose. Yushu Jin was certain that Xiao Chun was no match for Shermeng. However, at this moment, Xiao Chun was actually able to fight Shermeng to a standstill. This was somewhat out of Yushu Jin's expectations. Therefore, Yushu Jin subconsciously took a few more glances at Xiao Chun. There wasn't much emotion in Yushu Jin's eyes. In Yushu Jin's eyes, it was indeed not bad that Xiao Chun was able to fight evenly with Shermeng. Unfortunately, this bit of strength wasn't enough for Yushu Jin. At the very least, Xiao Chen's cultivation hadn't reached the perfection of the quasi-saint realm. If Xiao Chen's cultivation fell behind, he wouldn't be a match for Yushu Jin. Yushu Jin was like a spectator, coldly watching the development of the situation. As time went by, casualties began to appear in the battle between the two sides. Many of the supreme talents were either severely injured, unable to continue fighting, or killed directly. There were casualties on both sides. One after another, the supreme talents lost their lives in the fierce battle. However, no one chose to stop. After all, such an outcome was already expected. Both sides couldn't possibly back down in the slightest when it came to the immortal crystal spirit vein. Unless there was a clear victor, there was no possibility of stopping it all. The supreme talents fell one after another. At the same time, the outcome of the battle between the Divine Lord and the other First Holy Sons was also gradually decided. The first one to defeat his opponent was the First Holy Son of the First Mainland. He was rather lucky as his opponent wasn't strong. Therefore, after a fierce battle, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland successfully killed his opponent. After killing his opponent, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland immediately set his sights on Yushu Jin. Upon seeing that Yushu Jin remained indifferent and didn't make a move, the first holy son of the first mainland sneered. "Stop putting on an act. Go to hell." With a cold snort, he chose to attack without any hesitation. He remembered that the heavenly spiritual vein would belong to whoever killed Yushujin. The first holy son of the first mainland immediately attacked Yushujin. Upon seeing this, a look of disdain flashed across Yushujin's eyes. "You weren't my match even when you were at your peak, let alone now. Even if you want to die, you don't have to be in such a hurry." As soon as she finished speaking, Yushujin gently slapped out with her palm. Instantly, a terrifying aura continuously condensed, and a huge blue palm print instantly fell from the sky. The huge palm print fell fiercely. Upon seeing this, the first holy son of the first mainland's expression changed abruptly. Strong. Only in the face of Yushujin's attack did he realize how powerful she was. She was simply on a completely different level from the supreme talent that he had just killed. As the heir of the seventh realm, Yushujin naturally lived up to her reputation. Just like what he had said, even the first holy son of the first mainland at his peak was no match for her. Moreover, he had just experienced an intense battle. At this moment, it was even more impossible for him to be Yushujin's match. When the palm fell, there was no space for him to dodge at all. Immediately after, the first holy son of the first mainland could only brace himself to receive the palm. However, he didn't expect that in the face of this palm, he didn't have much ability to resist at all. In the end, he was killed in a single blow. After instantly killing the first holy son of the first mainland with a single palm, the first holy son of the fifth mainland, Song Yun, suddenly appeared behind Yushujin. Song Yun had also killed his opponent. At this moment, he suddenly attacked while Yushujin was dealing with the first holy son of the first mainland. Although his method was somewhat dishonorable, this was a battlefield, so who would care so much about it? He had been waiting for this opportunity, and now he finally seized it. Appearing behind Yushujin, Song Yun had a cold smile on his face. "Yushujin, die." With that, Song Yun directly clenched his fist into a claw. Then he clawed out. Spiritual chi madly gathered, quickly converging into a black claw that viciously swiped at Yushujin. This claw was Song Yun's killing move. It was extremely powerful. Moreover, Yushujin's own comprehension of the law of corrosion also surged out at this moment. As long as she was hit, even if it was only a slight flesh wound, the wound would quickly corrode and become fatal. It seemed like he had succeeded. Song Yun's face was filled with unconcealable excitement. However, at this moment, Yushujin, who was still indifferent, softly opened her mouth and said, "Seal." Then, an indescribable law power gathered around Yushujin. Song Yun's claw was unable to hit Yushujin. It was directly blocked by this layer of law power. It was impossible to break through this layer of law power. Song Yun's sneak attack, his killing move, couldn't hurt Yushujin at all. Song Yun exclaimed in disbelief. "How is this possible? Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1558. His all-out attack didn't even touch the corner of Yushujin's clothes. Facing this outcome, Song Yun couldn't believe his eyes. Besides, he had never seen the power of laws that blocked his attack. It could be said that Yushujin blocked Song Yun's sneak attack perfectly. She turned around unhurriedly with an indifferent expression and said softly, "Only an ant would do something as despicable as a sneak attack. But an ant will always be an ant. So what if it's a sneak attack?" Perhaps Song Yun's sneak attack was nothing more than a joke to Yushujin because she was confident that Song Yun couldn't possibly hurt her. Before Song Yun could react, Yushujin gently pointed her finger at him. Then, a mysterious power of law surrounded Song Yun. Song Yun was horrified to be surrounded by Yushujin's mysterious power of laws. He tried to defend himself with his spiritual energy, but it was a pity that the effects were minimal. He couldn't stop Yushujin's mysterious power of laws at all. Song Yun shrieked in horror. "What's that? What's that? Get lost! Get lost! All defenses were useless against Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws. Along with Song Yun's shrieks, Yu Shujin's expression changed. Then, Song Yun's voice came to an abrupt halt. Shortly after, he became sluggish as though he had turned into a fool. You've gone mad. I'll let you be a fool for the rest of your life. This is the best outcome for you. At least you're still alive, Yu Shujin said flatly to Song Yun, who was in a daze and had saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. Sealed Song Yun's consciousness? This was simply unheard of. How could one's consciousness be sealed? No one knew what method Yu Shujin used to do it. But judging from Song Yun's current state, he was indeed no different from a fool. He couldn't even speak and could only make sounds when he opened his mouth. This method was simply too strange. However, at this moment, the rest of the First Holy Sun, Divine Lord, and the others had also finished off their opponents. Following which, a few of them came to Yu Shujin's side and looked at Song Yun, who had already lost his consciousness. Their faces were incomparably solemn. Facing Sir God and the others alone, Yu Shujin did not look nervous at all. On the contrary, she smiled calmly and said, "It seems that there are quite a lot of people who are eager to die." Sir God and the others had defeated their opponents. Yu Shujin was not surprised and did not show any signs of anger. Faced with such a calm Yu Shujin, Sir God and the others looked at each other. Then, without hesitation, they attacked Yu Shujin together. Based on the strength that Yu Shujin had just displayed, it was impossible for them to stand a chance in a one-on-one battle. Therefore, they did not hesitate to join forces to attack Yu Shujin. Sir God, Long Yang, Tian Mushi, and the three first holy sons of the second, third, and sixth mainlands attacked Yu Shujin at the same time from different directions. Of the first holy sons of the seven mainlands, two had already died. One had lost his ability to fight. The first holy son of the fourth mainland had been killed by a prodigy from the seventh realm. He was not as strong as that prodigy, so he had been killed. However, this did not matter. The most important thing now was still Yu Shujin. As long as they could defeat Yu Shujin, they would win this battle. This was because Yu Shujin was the heir of the seventh realm. She was the symbol and idol of all the young prodigies of the seventh realm. If she was defeated, the other prodigies of the seventh realm would collapse. They did not care about fairness. Or rather, at a time like this, who would care about fairness? Therefore, Sir God and the others attacked together, intending to kill Yu Shujin. Yu Shujin smiled faintly in the face of the six people's attacks. Sir God and the others were all heavily injured. After all, they had killed their respective opponents. Naturally, they were not unscathed. As a result, their strength and aura were not at their peak. It was naturally much easier for Yu Shujin to deal with them. With a thought, a long sword appeared in Yu Shujin's hand. Yu Shujin was also a sword cultivator. She took a step forward and instantly arrived before the first holy son of the second mainland. She said softly, "Seal." Then, the mysterious power of laws appeared again. There was no way to stop it. It quickly enveloped the first holy son of the second mainland. Enveloped by the mysterious power of laws, the first holy son of the second mainland suddenly felt as if his limbs had disappeared into thin air. That's right. There was no pain at all. There were no wounds. However, his limbs seemed to have disappeared. They were clearly still there, but he could not move his limbs. He could not even move a finger. Strange. It was really too strange. He had inexplicably lost the connection with his limbs. Without his limbs, he was naturally unable to fight. Yu Shujin said indifferently, "You have no power to fight back now. For example, even if my sword slowly pierces your heart like this, all you can do is watch. There's nothing you can do." As she said that, Yu Shujin's sword slowly pierced the first holy son of the second mainland's heart. He could only watch as the sword pierced through his defenses and through his skin. In the end, it pierced through his heart. He was completely powerless. He could not even move a finger. The first holy son of the second mainland's eyes were filled with confusion and fear. Why was this happening? What sorcery had Yu Shujin used? He had no idea what Yu Shujin had done at all. However, it was too late to say anything now. Yu Shujin's sword had already pierced his heart. At the same time, the violent sword intent instantly destroyed all the life in his body. A chill immediately assaulted his body. At the same time, his consciousness gradually blurred. In the end, the first holy son of the second mainland plummeted to the ground, dead on the spot. She had killed a person in a single exchange. The Divine Lords and the others had not expected this outcome at all. However, now that things had come to this, there was no way out for them. Therefore, after the first holy son of the second continent died, the remaining 5 Divine Lords didn't stop. Instead, they all unleashed their own attacks. 5 attacks came at Yu Shujin from different directions. Yu Shujin had no intention of dodging their attacks. Just like before, she said softly, "Seal." Then, the mysterious power of laws formed a protective barrier around Yu Shujin, successfully blocking the attacks of the 5 monarchs. Begging for your collection, begging for your monthly votes, begging for your recommendation. Chapter 1559. It was the same method, but this time, it blocked the attacks of the 5 Sir Gods. Seeing that the 5 attacks were blocked, the faces of the 5 Sir Gods turned solemn. What kind of technique was this? First, he had mysteriously sealed Song Yun's intelligence, turning him into an idiot. Then, he had mysteriously sealed the limbs of the second continent's number 1 holy son before killing him. Now, he had blocked the combined attacks of the Divine Lord and the others. The power of law. What kind of power of law did Yu Shujin comprehend? After perfectly blocking everyone's attacks, Yu Shujin said indifferently, "Could it be that the so-called prodigies of the 7th wilderness only have this kind of strength? If that's the case, then it's a little disappointing." Yu Shujin defeated the Sir Gods group of 6 single-handedly. At the same time, the battle between Xiao Chun and Shi Meng had also reached its most intense stage. It would not be long before the outcome of the battle was decided. After fighting fiercely for several hours, Xiao Chun and Shi Meng both suffered serious injuries. Xiao Chun had the rapid, self-healing ability of the tempered battle body, but Shi Meng's physical strength was also very strong. Although he did not have the rapid, self-healing ability of Xiao Chun, the impact of ordinary injuries on Shi Meng was negligible. The two of them were evenly matched, and Xiao Chen's self-healing ability had already been exhausted. It was time to decide the outcome of the battle. Xiao Chun slashed out with his sword, and Shi Meng punched out with his fist. After another head-on collision, both of them were pushed back and spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. Looking at Xiao Chun, the expression in Shi Meng's eyes actually calmed down at this moment. His tone was also extremely calm as he said, "Xiao Chun, let's decide the outcome of the battle." Shi Meng had already acknowledged Xiao Chen's strength. Hearing that, Xiao Chun nodded and said, "Yes, it's time to decide the outcome of the battle." After saying that, the power of the sword domain in Xiao Chen's body suddenly erupted. His great sage realm cultivation base was also raised to the extreme at this moment. At this point in the battle, Xiao Chun finally decided to use his trump card. As Xiao Chen's aura increased, a giant finger formed by spiritual qi and the power of the sword domain slowly appeared behind him. It was a huge finger, and it was extremely solid. Even the fingerprints could be seen clearly. Along with the appearance of this huge finger, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth frantically gathered towards the tip of this huge finger. The 9th finger of the 9th heaven sword finger, which was also the last finger, was performed by Xianyuan sword finger. This was the first time that Xiao Chun had performed Xianyuan sword finger in public. It was the essence of the 9th heaven sword finger, and it was also the finger with the greatest might. Moreover, the 9th heaven sword finger had been improved by the Wine Taoist over the past 5 years, so it was much stronger than before. Even the Wine Taoist sighed with emotion. The 9th heaven sword finger was probably the most powerful upper sage grade martial technique below the immortal technique. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth frantically gathered. Facing the Xianyuan sword finger, Shi Meng's face also showed a grave expression for the first time. At the same time, Xiao Chen said faintly. I originally planned to use this move to deal with Yushu Jin, but now it seems that it will be very difficult to defeat you if I don't use this move. Xiao Chen had specially left the Xianyuan sword finger for Yushu Jin, but unfortunately, he was forced to use it in advance. However, there was no other way, because if he couldn't even defeat Meng, how could he defeat Yushu Jin? As soon as he finished speaking, a thick sword light flashed from the huge finger and rapidly rushed toward Meng. The power of this attack was absolutely terrifying. An ordinary quasi-saint supreme sovereign would probably die upon contact with it. With a grave expression, Meng didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. He let out a furious roar, and rays of yellow light continuously gathered around his body. He went all out. Then, the Xianyuan sword finger ruthlessly bombarded Meng's body. Meng also used his body to block the Xianyuan sword finger in the most simple and violent way. Meng roared angrily as he hugged the thick sword light tightly with both hands. His aura had been raised to the extreme by him. Meng hugged the Xianyuan sword finger tightly with both hands. Although he managed to block the Xianyuan sword finger, it was only temporary. Soon, Meng's skin began to bleed. The terrifying power of the Xianyuan sword finger was gradually tearing Meng's skin apart. Wounds quickly appeared. In just a few breaths, Meng had become a bloody man. His entire body was dyed red with blood, looking extremely terrifying. His body seemed to be torn apart by the countless sword qi contained in the Xianyuan sword finger. Even so, Meng still had no intention of retreating. The light around his body became denser and denser, and his aura also rose to the extreme. Under Meng's frenzy, there was even a moment when the Xianyuan sword finger's sword light seemed to be deflected by him. Unfortunately, although Meng had already calmed down and used his full strength, he was still swallowed by the Xianyuan sword finger in the end. He was ruthlessly struck to the ground by the Xianyuan sword finger. With a loud bang, a huge pit was formed on the ground. Meng also fell unconscious, lying in the middle of the deep pit with blood all over his body. After taking the Xianyuan sword finger head-on, Meng was only seriously injured and unconscious. He didn't die. At the same time, Xiao Chen no longer cared about Meng's life and death. Instead, he moved his feet and directly rushed towards Yushu Jin. The 5 divine monarchs besieged Yushu Jin, but it wasn't enough. They were swept away by Yushu Jin. In a short period of time, Yushu Jin had already killed 2 of them. The first chosen of his second and third mainland were also killed by Yushu Jin. Even the remaining 4 divine monarchs were in an extremely dangerous situation. At this moment, Yushu Jin slashed out with her sword. The tip of the sword fiercely rushed towards Longyang. His legs had been sealed by Yushu Jin's mysterious power of laws, so there was no way for him to dodge. Seeing the tip of the sword coming towards him, Longyang's eyes flashed with determination. He planned to take the attack head-on. However, just as Longyang was about to attack, Xiao Chen suddenly appeared in front of him. He also slashed out with his cyan lotus sword qi. Then, the 2 swords collided violently. However, Xiao Chen's cyan lotus sword qi was obviously not Yushu Jin's opponent. Therefore, Xiao Chen had to use 3 cyan lotus sword qi in a row to block Yushu Jin's attack. He successfully blocked Yushu Jin's attack and saved Longyang. At this moment, Yushu Jin didn't attack again. She glanced at Meng, who was lying in the deep pit, covered in blood and unconscious. Then, she looked at Xiao Chen and said with a faint smile in her eyes, "Not bad. Even Meng is not your opponent. Looks like you should be the strongest person among the younger generation in the 7th wilderness. Please add me to your collection. Monthly vote. Recommend me." Chapter 1560. Xiao Chen had defeated Meng, and Yushu Jin couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. In her opinion, Xiao Chen should be the first saint of the 7th wilderness because in terms of strength, the Divine Lord and the others were indeed inferior to Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen's expression was calm when he heard Yushu Jin's words, but he didn't feel relaxed in his heart. The 6 of them had besieged Yushu Jin, but she had swept them all away. 2 of them had been killed, and the remaining 4 were also severely injured. He had to admit that Yushu Jin was indeed extremely powerful. Xiao Chen knew that his chances of winning against her were not high. Of course, it would be different if Xiao Chen's cultivation broke through to the lesser perfection of the quasi-sage realm. Xiao Chen could still fight with Yushu Jin if their cultivations were similar. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. Xiao Chen's current cultivation was at the greater perfection of the quasi-sage realm, and he was only one step away from the lesser perfection. However, it was this one step that caused the gap between his cultivation and Yushu Jin's. Although he knew that he was no match for her, there was no way out now. Xiao Chen didn't think that Yushu Jin would stop if he and the other surrendered. He looked at Yushu Jin calmly. Yushu Jin smiled and said, "I'll give you time to recover, and then you and I will fight again." Yushu Jin didn't make a move. Instead, she gave Xiao Chen time to recover. Perhaps in Yushu Jin's opinion, victory would definitely belong to her, so she didn't take Xiao Chen seriously at all. That was why she was so generous to give Xiao Chen time to recover. Xiao Chen was stunned when he heard Yushu Jin's words. Yushu Jin smiled faintly and said, "I'm actually not interested in you guys. You're not bad, so I can give you a chance to fight with me. Of course, if you guys are willing to retreat now, I can also spare your lives. The choice is up to you." Xiao Chen was wrong. Yushu Jin didn't have the intention to kill them. The reason why she had killed them previously was because the prodigies of the 7th Wilderness had taken the initiative to attack. Of course, not wanting to kill them all didn't mean Yushu Jin had a good impression of the 7th Baron's Heaven's favorites. This was her personality. To put it bluntly, in Yushu Jin's heart, there was only one goal in coming to the northern underworld immortal realm, and that was the immortal crystal spirit vein. If anyone tried to stop her from obtaining the immortal crystal spiritual vein, she would kill them. On the other hand, if no one tried to stop her, Yushu Jin would not bother to make a move. It was such a simple thought. Xiao Chen was slightly stunned. Then he smiled bitterly. From Yushu Jin's words, Xiao Chen could tell that Yushu Jin was a very self-centered person. He didn't care about what the outside world thought. In any case, Yushu Jin would only consider whether she was comfortable or happy. If she was happy, Yushu Jin would let her off even if she was an enemy. On the other hand, if she was unhappy, then even if she was her companion, Yushu Jin would probably kill her. Xiao Chen thought to himself, "This is a man who is egotistical to the extreme." Then, Xiao Chen nodded slightly and said, "All right, let's fight to determine the winner. If I lose, I'll give you the immortal crystal spirit vein." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen looked at the 7th Baron's Heaven's favorites who were still fighting fiercely and shouted, "Everyone, stop fighting." Since they had already decided to fight to determine the winner of the immortal crystal spirit vein, there was no point in continuing to fight. Moreover, judging from the situation, if they insisted on fighting to the death, they would probably suffer great losses in the end. Xiao Chen didn't want to see such an outcome. After all, Qin Shu and the other 2 women, as well as Long Qing and Xin Yuan Ling, were also on the battlefield. Xiao Chen didn't want anything to happen to them. Moreover, their purpose in coming to the northern underworld immortal realm was to stop Yushu Jin from obtaining the immortal crystal spirit vein, not to fight to the death with the younger generation of the 7th realm. Therefore, there was no point in continuing to fight. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone stopped fighting. At the same time, Yushu Jin said calmly, "Let's stop fighting." Upon hearing this, the young geniuses from the 7th realm immediately stopped what they were doing. The Sky Prides from both sides had stopped fighting. However, after the intense battle, both sides had suffered quite a number of casualties. Originally, each side had about 500 people. Now about 100 of them had died, and the rest were all injured. After the 2 sides stopped fighting, Xiao Chen sat down cross-legged and began to recover from his injuries. Facing Yushu Jin, Xiao Chen's chances of winning were not high. However, this battle had to be fought. Otherwise, the immortal crystal spirit vein would be given away to someone else. Moreover, among the 7th Baron's talents, The only one who still had a chance to fight against Yu Shujin was Shao Chun. After all, the Divine Lord and the other 5 had besieged Yu Shujin, but Yu Shujin had defeated them all. Therefore, the Divine Lord and the others would definitely lose if they fought. Only Shao Chun had a chance to fight against Yu Shujin. While Shao Chun was recovering, a young 7th Realm's talent came to Yu Shujin's side. Because he had just gone through a great battle, the young 7th Realm's talent was still full of blood chi. He looked at Yu Shujin with dissatisfaction. Heir, why did you stop fighting? With the strength of an heir, he can definitely kill the 7th Wilderness Holy Sun here. The young 7th Realm's talent was very dissatisfied with Yu Shujin's actions. She could have killed everyone in the 7th Baron. Why did she suddenly stop? However, Yu Shujin only said calmly in the face of his doubts, "Are you questioning my decision?" There was no anger in her tone, but the young 7th Realm's talent's expression still changed when he heard that. Then, he cupped his hands and bowed to Yu Shujin in horror. "Please forgive me, heir apparent. Just now, he didn't think much of it before, but after hearing Yu Shujin's words, he realized that Yu Shujin wasn't a kind person. He wanted to explain, but unfortunately, Yu Shujin didn't give him the chance. Before he could finish, Yu Shujin interrupted him. "Go back to the punishment hall to receive your punishment." No one could question Yu Shujin's decision. Although Yu Shujin gave Shao Chun time to recover and wanted to have a fair fight with him, the young 7th Realm's talents couldn't understand why. Even so, they couldn't question Yu Shujin. Those who were familiar with Yu Shujin knew that many times, Yu Shujin's decisions were unpredictable and difficult to accept. It could be said that Yu Shujin acted based on her own preferences. As for the result, it wasn't within Yu Shujin's consideration. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, the young 7th Realm's talent who had questioned Yu Shujin nodded respectfully. "Yes, thank you for your mercy, heir apparent." Ignoring him, Yu Shujin looked at Shao Chun and murmured softly, "The 7th Baron's first saint. Let me see what the young 7th Baron's talent is capable of." Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1561. He really let Shao Chun heal himself. Yu Shujin had no intention of attacking him. The young geniuses from the 7th Realm didn't understand Yu Shujin's willful decision, but they didn't dare to say anything. After all, Yu Shujin was the heir of Kunlun's field. His words were orders to these young talents. Moreover, many of them were familiar with Yu Shujin. They knew that this was his personality. It was useless to say anything. Since Yu Shujin wanted to fight Shao Chun so much, let him be. It wasn't the first time that Yu Shujin had done this kind of nonsense. Yu Shujin patiently waited for Shao Chun to heal himself. He wasn't interested in a seriously injured Shao Chun. He wanted to fight Shao Chun in his best condition. Several hours passed. With the help of pills, Shao Chun's injuries recovered quickly. Shao Chun slowly opened his eyes and looked at Yu Shujin with a complicated expression. Yu Shujin was truly a strange person. Both of them were from different camps. Originally, they should have fought to the death. However, Yu Shujin was so willful and reckless. She would do whatever she wanted to do, regardless of the consequences. Shao Chun stood up and looked at Yu Shujin. "Come on. I've been waiting for you for a long time," Yu Shujin replied softly. Then, the two of them flew up into the air one after another. As for the others, they didn't intend to fight at all. They just stared at the two of them. They stood in the air and looked at each other. Shao Chun didn't feel any killing intent or hostility from Yu Shujin's eyes. There was only a strong desire to fight. This was strange. They were enemies, but Yu Shujin only revealed his desire to fight. This meant that Yu Shujin really just wanted to fight Shao Chun. He didn't have any other intentions. Like Hua Wushuang, Yu Shujin was a battle maniac. Of course, there was a difference between Yu Shujin and Hua Wushuang. Yu Shujin would only be interested in people she was interested in. Like Sir God and the others, Yu Shujin was not interested in them. Hence, she had no intention of fighting with them. In Yu Shujin's opinion, As long as he could defeat Xiao Chun, it would be equivalent to defeating all the young geniuses in the seventh wilderness. Therefore, he only needed to fight with Xiao Chun. There was no need for him to fight with the others. Yu Shujin looked at Xiao Chun indifferently and said, "Your physical body is good. You're recovering fast." Hearing this, Xiao Chun replied faintly, "Come on, let's fight." With that, Xiao Chun used his mind, and the Wuchen sword instantly appeared in his hand. With the Wuchen sword in his hand, Xiao Chun's aura instantly became fierce. The corners of Yu Shujin's mouth curled into a smile when she sensed Xiao Chun's fierce aura. She then drew her sword as well. At the same time, a fierce sword that was no weaker than Xiao Chun's sword into the sky. Both of them were from a human clan and sword cultivators. They stood with their swords, and two different sword essences kept colliding. At the same time, Xiao Chun and Yu Shujin both released their sword realms. The two sword realms instantly overlapped and enveloped the two of them. Their sword realms had reached the small perfection realm. With the appearance of the sword realms, the place where the two of them were fighting seemed to be confined. Countless sword chi whistled, and it made people's hair stand on end. It could be said that Xiao Chun and Yu Shujin's sword principle cultivation had already reached the peak. Even if they were compared with the sword cultivators of the older generation, their sword principle would not be weaker. The two of them could already be considered the top sword cultivators. They were about to engage in a fierce battle. The fierce sword essence seemed to be tearing the sky apart. The sword chi whistled, and they looked at each other for a while. In the end, Xiao Chun took the initiative to attack. He slashed out with his sword and instantly released the green lotus sword chi. A cyan sword streaked across the sky. When Yu Shujin saw that, she remained expressionless. She also attacked with her sword. She was also using a high-grade holy tier martial skill. A dark red sword chi shot out and collided with the cyan lotus sword chi. The two sword chi collided violently. Yu Shujin's sword chi obviously had the upper hand. This didn't mean that Xiao Chun's sword principle cultivation was inferior to Yu Shujin's. It was completely because his realm couldn't keep up. Xiao Chun was now in the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, while Yu Shujin was already in the minor perfection of the quasi-sage realm. She was one minor realm higher than Xiao Chun. Therefore, Yu Shujin obviously had the upper hand in a head-on collision. Yu Shujin could suppress Xiao Chun because of her higher cultivation. This was something that couldn't be helped. Xiao Chun had already expected such a situation. Therefore, he didn't hesitate. Xiao Chun slashed out a second time to break Yu Shujin's sword edge. Yu Shujin slashed out once while Xiao Chun had to use two swords to resist. This was the suppression that came from the cultivation realm. As expected, Xiao Chun was at a disadvantage after the attack. However, at this moment, Yu Shujin made another unexpected decision. Yu Shujin said faintly, "Let's do this. I forgot that you are in the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm." With that, Yu Shujin actually took the initiative to suppress her cultivation to the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, the same as Xiao Chun. She actually took the initiative to suppress her cultivation in order to have a fair battle with Xiao Chun. Looking at Yu Shujin in the sky, the young geniuses of the seventh realm sighed helplessly. Here it comes again. This fellow's willful temper is here again. Many of the young geniuses of the seventh realm weren't surprised that Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation. Instead, they only revealed deep helplessness. She started to act willfully again. But what could they do? She was an heir. No one could control her. Looking helplessly at Yu Shujin, who had suppressed her cultivation to the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, many geniuses of the seventh realm sighed helplessly. It was also very tiring to follow such an heir. Yu Shujin was so willful every time. Xiao Chun was also stunned by Yu Shujin's behavior. It was the first time he had met someone like that. Yu Shujin had indeed been mischievous before, and she had done it according to her own whims. However, since Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation, what could Xiao Chun do? Without thinking much, Xiao Chun moved his feet and took the initiative to attack. Using the mysterious sky steps, Xiao Chun instantly appeared on Yu Shujin's left side and stabbed out with his sword. Facing Xiao Chen's attack, Yu Shujin gently raised the sword in her hand and exquisitely blocked Xiao Chen's attack. At the same time, her body tilted slightly. The sword in her hand suddenly changed direction and slashed directly at Xiao Chun. She had switched from defense to offense. Seeing this, Xiao Chun could only choose to withdraw and retreat. It could be said that she had perfectly blocked Xiao Chen's attack without using any other abilities. She had only blocked it with her sword principle. From this, it was enough to see that Yu Shujin's sword principle cultivation was absolutely not weaker than Xiao Chen's. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1562. Yu Shujin blocked Xiao Chen's attack perfectly and then counterattacked with an exquisite sword move. She displayed her superb sword cultivation as soon as she made her move. However, Xiao Chen didn't panic at all. After retreating, he gently pointed his finger and instantly performed the 8th finger of the 9th heaven sword finger, the red heaven sword finger. A fiery red sword ray flashed and instantly shot toward Yu Shujin. In the face of Xiao Chen's attack, Yu Shujin slashed down with her sword. The two sword rays collided fiercely again. After taking the initiative to suppress her cultivation, Yu Shujin's cultivation realm was obviously non-existent. Therefore, Xiao Chun didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in this head-on collision. The two sides fought fiercely. Although this was only the beginning, the strength displayed by both Xiao Chun and Yu Shujin was enough to shock the others present. I didn't expect Xiao Chen's strength to have improved to such a level. Tian Mushi and the other side as they watched the battle in the sky. They still remember that 5 years ago, Xiao Chen's strength was only on par with the three of them. But now, after 5 years, Xiao Chun had obviously surpassed them in strength. This naturally made Tian Mushi and the other sigh. However, Qin Shiru and the other 3 girls didn't have such thoughts at this time. They all looked at the battle in the sky with worried expressions. Although they had confidence in Xiao Chun, Yu Shujin, as the heir of the 7th realm, wasn't someone to be trifled with. The battle between the two of them was extremely dangerous. The slightest carelessness could be fatal. All kinds of martial arts techniques bloomed in the sky. Xiao Chun and Yu Shujin gradually revealed their true abilities. However, in terms of sword cultivation, there wasn't much of a gap between the two of them. Whether it was Xiao Chun or Yu Shujin, their understanding of sword cultivation could be considered top-notch. Looking at the battle between the two of them, it was probably impossible for them to determine the winner with just sword cultivation. After a series of several hundred moves, the two of them were evenly matched. It was difficult to determine the victor. Regarding this, the battle intent in Yu Shujin's eyes grew increasingly intense. Not bad. Xiao Chun was indeed a good opponent, which made Yu Shujin very satisfied. Especially Xiao Chen's sword. It could be said that he was the strongest among the younger generation that Yu Shujin had ever seen. He was not any weaker than himself. Overflowing with fighting spirit, Yu Shujin's attacks became increasingly ferocious. In response to this, Xiao Chun did not shrink back at all. Similarly, he did not show any signs of weakness as he met her attacks head-on. Movement technique, sword Dao, martial technique, sword domain. The two of them could be said to have gone all out at this moment. The terrifying aftershock of the battle almost swept through the entire horizon. Such an intense battle shocked the crowd below. Up until now, Yu Shujin knew that it was already impossible to defeat Xiao Chun with just Xiao Chen's cultivation in the way of the sword. After all, Yu Shujin's cultivation in the way of the sword was not any weaker than his own. Yu Shujin had already witnessed Xiao Chen's terrifying cultivation in the way of the sword. An inexplicable power of laws erupted from Yu Shujin as he looked at Xiao Chun calmly. You're not bad. At the very least, your cultivation in the way of the sword is one of the strongest I've ever seen. It was rare for Yu Shujin to praise Xiao Chun. However, Xiao Chun did not care about the praise at all. At this moment, Xiao Chen's attention was completely focused on the mysterious law that Yu Jin had unleashed. It was a law that Xiao Chen had never seen before. At the same time, as Yu Jin unleashed the mysterious law, the expressions of Tian Mushi and the others changed. They had all witnessed how Yu Jin used the mysterious law to kill the previous few people. It was a very mysterious and powerful power of laws. While the few of them were secretly worried for Xiao Chen, Yu Jin yelled softly, "Seal." Then the mysterious power of laws struck Xiao Chen directly. In the face of the attack of the power of laws, spiritual energy defense was obviously useless. Furthermore, Xiao Chen also immediately felt that his hands seemed to be bound by something. He gradually lost all feeling in his hands, as if they no longer existed. Xiao Chen was slightly taken aback. His hands were not listening to him at all, as though they did not exist at all. His hands hung limply by his side, and he couldn't even move a finger. Looking at this scene, Xiao Chen was shocked. What kind of power of laws is this? It's actually capable of doing this. Looking at Xiao Chen's limp hands, Yu Jin said flatly, "I've sealed your hands." Xiao Chen, what do you think the outcome will be for a sword cultivator without his hands? Sealed? My hands were sealed? Upon hearing Yu Jin's words, Xiao Chen was taken aback. Seeing this, Yu Jin had no intention of hiding anything and said plainly, "The law that I comprehended is the sealing law. It can seal everything in this world, just like this." As she spoke, Yu Jin extended her right hand slightly. Sealing law gathered on her right hand. Immediately, the space above her palm distorted slightly. Then, it was as if it had been frozen. It could even seal space. Not only that, but the sealing law could also seal everything in this world, including spiritual energy, air, water, fire, and so on. Xiao Chen's hands were sealed by Yu Jin, and he couldn't move at all. The sealing law. He didn't expect Yu Jin to have comprehended the sealing law. The sealing law was also a level 3 law. It was very powerful and extremely strange. Xiao Chen couldn't feel his hands at all. A strange glint flashed in his eyes as he looked at Yu Jin. She was obviously more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Xiao Chen's hands hung limply by his side. Qin Shiru and the other 7th Wilderness geniuses below were also shocked, especially Tian Mushi, the Divine Lord, and the others who had fought with Yu Jin just now. At that moment, looking at Xiao Chen in the sky, Long Yang said with a grave expression, "Not good." Their memories of Yu Jin's mysterious power of laws were still fresh in their minds. Moreover, they were extremely fearful of it. Earlier, Yu Jin had relied on the mysterious power of laws to sweep through the 6 of them so easily. Judging from Xiao Chen's appearance, it seemed that he had also been hit. His hands hung limply by his side, and it was obvious that he couldn't move at all. With a grave expression, the Divine Lord said in a deep voice, "This is going to be troublesome." Everyone broke out in cold sweat for Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen suddenly revealed a faint smile and said, "The sealing law. I see. But do you really think that it can seal everything? Please collect, vote, recommend." Chapter 1563. Xiao Chen's hands were sealed by Yu Jin, but there wasn't the slightest panic or fear on his face. On the contrary, he was extremely calm. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yu Jin was also curious. But soon, an equally tyrannical power of law surged from Xiao Chen's body. The appearance of this power of law stunned Yu Jin at first. Then she said with a grim expression, "The 5 elements of law." That's right, the power of law that suddenly appeared in Xiao Chen's body was the level 3 law of the 5 elements. In 5 years, Xiao Chen had comprehended the 5 elements of law, and the 5 elements of law could be said to be the nemesis of the sealing law. The sealing law could seal everything in the world, even the space law of a divine lord. However, there were 2 laws in the world that the sealing law couldn't seal. One was the time law, and the other was the 5 elements of law. Needless to say, the time law was like the rotation of gears. No one or anything could stop the flow of time. so the sealing law couldn't seal time. As for the 5 elements of law, the 5 elements were endless, so the sealing law couldn't seal them either. After hearing that Yushu Jin had comprehended the sealing law, Xiao Chun was no longer worried because the 5 elements of law that he had comprehended were the nemesis of the sealing law. Therefore, Yushu Jin's sealing law was completely useless in front of Xiao Chun. Of course, this didn't mean that the 5 elements of law were stronger than the sealing law. The power of law was mutually reinforcing and restraining. For example, Yushu Jin's sealing law could restrain the space law of a divine lord, but it was restrained by Xiao Chen's 5 elements of law. If the sealing law couldn't be sealed, then it was naturally useless. Sensing the 5 elements of law that erupted from Xiao Chen's body, Yushu Jin's eyes flashed with surprise at first, but she soon calmed down. Looking at the smile on Xiao Chen's face, Yushu Jin said indifferently, "The 5 elements of law, not bad." At this moment, Xiao Chun had already used the 5 elements of law to break the seal of the sealing law. After moving his hands, Xiao Chun took the initiative to attack. He broke Yushu Jin's sealing law without any pressure. Seeing this scene, Qin Shu, Xin Yuanling, Tian Mushi, and the others secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Yushu Jin's sealing law was the most dreadful, but now it seemed that the sealing law had no effect on Xiao Chun. After comprehending the 5 elements of law, Xiao was Yushu Jin's nemesis. Isn't this called everything has its vanquisher? Looking at the fierce battle in the sky, Long Yang revealed a lazy smile. It was true that there was always something to overcome something else. The space law of the Divine Lord was known as the strongest power of law, yet was unable to do anything to Yushu Jin's sealing law. Now, Xiao Chun had comprehended the 5 elemental laws, which rendered Yushu Jin's sealing law powerless. However, just as Long Yang's voice fell, Yushu Jin, who was fighting fiercely in the sky again, said with a smile on her face, "The 5 elements of law can indeed restrain the sealing law. But Xiao Chun, do you really think this restraint is perfect?" Yushu Jin's sealing law once again emerged on Xiao Chun. This time, it was only aimed at Xiao Chen's right hand. Yushu Jin wanted to seal Xiao Chen's right hand, which was holding the sword. Seeing this, Xiao Chun naturally wouldn't be careless. He immediately mobilized the power of the 5 elements of law. For a moment, he lost feeling in his right hand, but it was quickly broken by the 5 elements of law. In less than a breath's time, the sealing law's power was broken by the 5 elements of law. However, at Xiao Chen's and Yushu Jin's level, a blink of an eye was enough to change a lot of things. Therefore, the moment Xiao Chun lost feeling in his right hand, Yushu Jin instantly attacked. She slashed out with her sword, and the tip of the sword slashed out and instantly hit Xiao Chun, leaving a deep wound on his chest. "I don't need to completely seal you. I only need to slow you down a little, and that will be enough to give me a chance to severely injure you," Yushu Jin said indifferently after hitting him with her sword. Xiao Chun didn't reply to Yushu Jin. He activated the tempered battle body, and the wound on his chest quickly healed. Afterwards, Xiao Chun erupted with the power of the 5 elements, forming a layer around him to block Yushu Jin's sealing law. However, even so, Yushu Jin's sealing law was still impossible to guard against. At that moment, Yushu Jin no longer had any extravagant hopes of sealing Xiao Chun with the sealing law. She only needed to slow Xiao Chun down for a moment, and that would be enough. As for Xiao Chun, he was fully on guard against Yushu Jin's sealing law. The two of them fought fiercely as they clashed with the power of law. For a moment, it seemed like they had returned to where they were before. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The battle returned to a tense state. Xiao Chun couldn't do anything to Yushu Jin, and Yushu Jin couldn't do anything to Xiao Chun either. In the fierce battle, all kinds of powerful saint-level martial arts techniques were constantly displayed by the two of them. The battle was even more intense than before. At this point in the battle, even the many prodigies from the 7th realm were slowly starting to be shocked. Looking at the battle in the sky, a prodigy from the 7th realm whispered, This is the first time I've seen someone fight with an air to this extent. The seventh wilderness saint is quite strong, but unfortunately, he's still going to lose. Xiao Qin's combat power was indeed very strong, and the prodigies from the seventh realm all admitted this. Even so, they still didn't think that Xiao Qian had any chance of winning. The reason was very simple: cultivation. Although Xiao Qian and Yu Shujin were locked in battle now, that was because Yu Shujin had taken the initiative to suppress her cultivation. Once she stopped suppressing it, and her cultivation returned to the minor perfection of Dao quasi-saint realm, the difference of one small realm was enough to break the balance between the two of them. With the difference in cultivation, it was destined that Xiao Qian couldn't win. Unfortunately, if Xiao Qian had the same cultivation as Yu Shujin, it would be hard to say who would win this battle. Unfortunately, Xiao Qin's cultivation was one small realm lower than Yu Shujin's. The battle in the sky couldn't be decided for a long time. The two of them couldn't do anything to each other. At this point in the battle, Yu Shujin also understood that it was very difficult for her to defeat Xiao Qian in the same realm. After fighting for so long, Yu Shujin was also satisfied. It was almost time to collect the immortal crystal spirit vein. She took the initiative to retreat and looked at Xiao Qian. "You're not bad. I'm very satisfied with this battle. I won't kill you. You can leave." Yu Shujin was already satisfied. There was no need to continue fighting with Xiao Qian. Moreover, Yu Shujin was confident that once she stopped suppressing her cultivation, Xiao Qian wouldn't be her opponent at all. Therefore, Yu Shujin said this: "Please collect, vote, recommend. Sword Master 8 Desolation." Chapter 1564. In fact, Yu Shujin was not very interested in killing Xiao Qian. In Yu Shujin's opinion, Xiao Qian was not her match now, and Xiao Qian would not be her match in the future. The reason was very simple. As long as Yu Shujin obtained the heavenly spiritual vein, she would be able to attain the immortal realm and condense the heavenly immortal mansion. At that time, the gap between her and Xiao Qian would be infinitely widened. By then, Yu Shujin would be able to kill Xiao Qian with a single strike of his sword. The immortal crystal spiritual vein was the most important thing. Unfortunately, Xiao Qian had no intention of retreating after hearing Yu Shujin's words. His face was calm as he said with determination, "The battle has not ended yet. How can you say that it's over?" Xiao Qian had no intention of retreating. Hearing this, displeasure flashed across Yu Shujin's eyes. She then said indifferently, "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Yu Shujin did not kill Xiao Qian because she felt that Xiao Qian would not be a threat to her in the future. Moreover, Yu Shujin felt very refreshed after the battle with Xiao Qian today. Therefore, she spared his life. However, since Xiao Qian did not know what was good for him, she could not blame him. As soon as she finished speaking, a soaring aura suddenly erupted from Yu Shujin's body. At this moment, Yu Shujin did not suppress her cultivation anymore. Her cultivation of the perfection quasi-saint realm suddenly erupted. Yu Shujin looked at Xiao Qian and said indifferently, "There is a gap in cultivation. You should know that you have no chance of winning. It seems that you want to die wholeheartedly." She no longer suppressed her cultivation and looked at Xiao Qian. Yu Shujin did not give Xiao Qian a chance to reply. She took a step forward and appeared in front of Xiao Qian in an instant. Then, she slashed out fiercely with her sword. Xiao Qian reacted unhappily to Yu Shujin's sword. He raised his sword to block the attack. However, this time, Xiao Qian was directly pushed back by Yu Shujin's sword. They were no longer evenly matched like before. Just by relying on her cultivation, Yu Shujin had already gained the upper hand. When they saw Yu Shujin forcing Xiao Qian back with a single sword strike, the seventh wilderness saints seemed to recall that they had no chance of winning this battle at all. Previously, Xiao Qian and Yu Shujin were evenly matched, and it was hard to tell who was the winner. Everyone was almost finished. From the beginning to the end, Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation to fight with Xiao Qian. Xiao Qian and Yu Shujin's cultivation were not at the same level. Therefore, It was impossible for Xiao Chun to win this battle. As Yu Shujin unleashed her full power and no longer suppressed her cultivation, she forced Xiao Chun back with one strike. Only then did the Seventh Wilderness Saints realize that Yu Shujin's cultivation was higher than Xiao Chen's. The hope in their eyes quickly faded. It was impossible to win this battle. There was no chance of winning at all. It was impossible for Yu Shujin to defeat someone who was a higher level than her. As the heir of Hachiba Senkai's seventh realm, it would be unheard of if Yu Shujin was defeated by Xiao Chun, who was a higher level than her. The hope in their eyes turned to despair. However, Xiao Chen's expression did not change much at this time. Even after being forced back by Yu Shujin's sword, Xiao Chen's face was still calm. He even took the initiative to attack Yu Shujin with his sword. Seeing that Xiao Chun still had no intention of retreating, Yu Shujin's eyes flashed with a trace of murderous intent. She said coldly, "Reckless." In Yu Shujin's opinion, Xiao Chun was reckless. She had already let him go, but Xiao Chun still took the initiative to court death. This made Yu Shujin's murderous intent quickly condense in her heart. Another fierce battle ensued. However, the situation this time was completely different from before. After not taking the initiative to suppress her cultivation, Yu Shujin clearly had the upper hand. Although Xiao Chun could still resist for a while with his powerful combat strength, this was only temporary. If the battle went on for a long time, Xiao Chun would definitely lose. Is the first saint of the seventh wilderness out of his mind? He knows that he is no match for her, but he still wants to be arrogant? Many geniuses of the seventh realm said disdainfully at this time. In their opinion, Xiao Chun was simply courting death. Yu Shujin had already intended to let him go, but this person did not appreciate it. Ha! He was indeed courting death. No one thought that Xiao Chun could defeat Yu Shujin, but Xiao Chun did not think so at this time. There was no fear in his eyes. On the contrary, there was a trace of excitement. No one knew why Xiao Chun was so excited. In the fierce battle, as everyone expected, Xiao Chun gradually fell into a disadvantageous position, while Yu Shujin's attacks became more and more violent. In the end, under everyone's gaze, Yu Shujin punched Xiao Chun in the abdomen. His entire body was blasted from the sky and slammed into a small hill not far away. The powerful force instantly turned the small hill into ashes and collapsed. Smoke and dust rose everywhere, and the gravel buried Xiao Chun in an instant. Seeing Xiao Chun being blasted away by a punch, Qin Shiru and the other two ladies cried out anxiously, "Darling!" She immediately tried to fly in Xiao Chen's direction, but Tian Mushi stopped her. "Don't go. What do you do if you go?" The four ladies were worried about Xiao Chun. They all looked at Xiao Chun, who was covered in dust and gravel. Yu Shujin, who stood proudly in the sky, said flatly, "You're courting death." With the gap in cultivation, Xiao Chen's defeat was inevitable. Facing such an outcome, the seventh wilderness's holy sons, especially the divine monarch, revealed a look of hesitation. Now that Xiao Chun had been defeated, should they still try to stop Yu Shujin? If they did, would they be able to stop Yu Shujin? And if they didn't, were they just going to watch Yu Shujin snatch the immortal crystal spirit vein? Then they could become immortals and form the heavenly immortal abode? For a moment, they didn't know what to do. However, Yu Shujin seemed to have seen through the divine monarch and the others' thoughts. She turned around and looked coldly at the people from the seventh wilderness. "I'm a little tired of this. Whoever stops me will die." Yu Shujin's willful temper rose again. Previously, she only wanted to fight Xiao Chun, but now she only wanted to get the immortal crystal spirit vein as soon as possible. Therefore, if anyone dared to stop her, Yu Shujin would undoubtedly kill them with lightning speed. Xiao Chun was defeated. It seemed like no one could stop Yu Shujin. But to everyone's surprise, as soon as Yu Shujin's voice fell, the place where Xiao Chun was standing, although it was already covered in dust, suddenly emitted a terrifying aura. This aura had obviously surpassed the greater mastery of the quasi-saint stage and reached the lesser perfection of the quasi-saint stage. Upon sensing this aura, Yushujin's face sank and her eyes narrowed. He broke through? The sudden appearance of this lesser perfection of the quasi-saint stage aura was undoubtedly from Xiao Chun. In other words, Xiao Chun had broken through during the battle. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1565. The sudden appearance of this terrifying aura stunned everyone present. Then, countless pairs of eyes looked at the place where Xiao Chun was. Smoke and dust were rising, but at the same time, an aura of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm also soared into the sky. Breakthrough in battle. These words appeared in everyone's mind when they felt this terrifying aura. At the same time, a look of disbelief flashed across their eyes. Who would have thought that Xiao Chun would actually make a breakthrough in battle? Under everyone's gaze, a figure slowly rose into the sky from the smoke and dust. It was Xiao Chun. There was still a trace of blood at the corner of Xiao Chun's mouth, but there was a smile on his face. In fact, Xiao Chun was persistent in continuing the battle with Yu Shujin because his cultivation had already reached the limit of the greater perfection of the quasi-sage realm. He only needed an opportunity to break through to the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. Xiao Chun treated Yu Shujin as this opportunity, or rather, he treated Yu Shujin as his whetstone. He used the enormous pressure that Yu Shujin gave him to forcefully break through the barrier of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. It had to be said that Xiao Chen's idea was indeed very crazy. But many times, if one didn't go crazy, how could one break and then rebuild? In the end, Xiao Chun still succeeded. Using the enormous pressure that Yu Shujin gave him, Xiao Chun successfully broke through to the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. His cultivation was now on par with Yu Shujin's. Previously, his biggest weakness was his cultivation realm. Now, Xiao Chen's breakthrough completely made up for this weakness. Xiao Chun had a relieved smile on his face. To be honest, when he was fighting with Yu Shujin previously, Xiao Chun wasn't confident, because if he couldn't break through the bottleneck of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm, then he would naturally be defeated and might even be killed by Yu Shujin. Facing Xiao Chen's faint smile, Yu Shujin's eyes also flashed with surprise at the beginning, but she quickly regained her composure. Yu Shujin also did not expect that Xiao Chun could break through to the perfection quasi-saint realm. But even so, Yu Shujin was not afraid of Xiao Chun. Yu Shujin quickly recovered from her initial shock. She looked at Xiao Chun and said indifferently, "You are gambling with your life." Yu Shujin obviously saw through Xiao Chen's previous thoughts. Indeed, Xiao Chun was gambling with his life. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled and said, "But in the end, I won the bet, didn't I? Do you think that you can contend against me just because you have broken through to the perfection quasi-sage realm?" Yu Shujin said unhurriedly. "We won't know until we fight," Xiao Chun said. Both of their cultivations were completely equal. Xiao Chun no longer had a reason to be afraid of Yu Shujin. Hearing this, the killing intent in Yu Shujin's eyes completely erupted at this moment. She took a step forward and slashed the long sword in her hand directly at Xiao Chun. This was the first time that Yu Shujin had made up her mind to kill Xiao Chun since the start of the battle. Not for any other reason, but because Xiao Chun made her feel very uncomfortable. Xiao Chun actually dared to use her as a stepping stone to break through to the next cultivation. Sensing the killing intent on Yu Shujin's body, Xiao Chun was not afraid at all. He also moved his feet and directly executed the mysterious sky steps, rushing toward Yu Shujin. Both of them did not give in, and the fierce battle broke out again. But this time, facing Yu Shujin, Xiao Chun was no longer like before. After breaking through to the next cultivation, Xiao Chun's combat strength naturally rose as well. Xiao Chun did not fall into a disadvantageous position in the fierce battle with Yu Shujin. Everything seemed to have returned to the previous situation. The two of them were entangled again, and it was difficult to determine the winner. Facing Xiao Chun, who had the same cultivation as her, Yu Shujin found it difficult to gain any advantage. Although she did not hold back, she still could not defeat Xiao Chun. Yu Shujin could not do anything to Xiao Chun, and Xiao Chun also seemed to be unable to do anything to Yu Shujin. Both of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged more than 100 moves. Looking at the battle that was much more intense than before, the geniuses of the seventh realm below could no longer be as calm as before. There was no other way. Previously, Yu Shujin was sure that she would win, but now it was different. Looking at the situation in front of them, it was really hard to say whether Yu Shujin could win or not. It was difficult to determine the winner. The only thing that made the geniuses of the seventh realm a little relieved was that Xiao Chun could not defeat Yu Shujin. That was the only thing worth rejoicing about. However, just as the geniuses of the seventh realm were thinking this, Xiao Chun suddenly slashed out with his sword, instantly using the spiritual slash. Xiao Chun had not used the spiritual slash for a long time. After 5 years of cultivation, Xiao Chun's spiritual slash, or rather the heavenly Tao sword embryo, had made great progress. Now the spiritual slash was much stronger than before. He slashed out with his sword, and an invisible blade instantly sank into Yu Shujin's mind. This was the first time Yu Shujin had seen Xiao Chun's spiritual slash, so she was not prepared for it. By the time he realized that something was amiss, it was already too late. The spiritual slash struck Yu Shujin's soul mercilessly. In an instant, Yu Shujin couldn't help but let out a blood-curdling scream. Her eyes turned bloodshot as she bellowed. Spiritual attack. She didn't expect Xiao Chun to be able to use a spiritual attack. Moreover, it was so powerful. In terms of power, the spiritual slash from before was no weaker than a high-grade Saint Martial skill. With such a powerful attack, and the fact that Yu Shujin was not prepared for it, Yu Shujin's soul was obviously severely injured. With her soul severely damaged, Yu Shujin's aura had also become unstable. Xiao Chun naturally would not let go of her so easily after succeeding in his attack. He immediately leaped up and entangled Yu Shujin. After severely injuring Yu Shujin's saint's soul, Xiao Chun's attacks became more violent, not giving Yu Shujin any time to catch her breath. Yu Shujin's soul was already severely injured, so her combat strength had obviously dropped a lot. For a moment, Yu Shujin was obviously at a disadvantage. She was no longer a match for Xiao Chun. After Xiao Chun successfully broke through to the perfect quasi-saint stage, there was almost no difference in their combat strength. Now that Yu Shujin was severely injured, the result was naturally destined. Yu Shujin was going to lose this battle. Seeing that Yu Shujin's defeat was inevitable, the sky prides of the seventh world naturally couldn't hold back anymore. They soared into the sky, intending to join the battle. However, the seventh wilderness chosens naturally wouldn't agree and join the battle. A great battle broke out between the two sides again. However, such a battle had no effect on the result, because as long as Yu Shujin was defeated, the sky prides of the seventh world wouldn't be able to do anything. The result was already destined. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1566. Yu Shujin's defeat was inevitable. Once Yu Shujin was defeated, the other geniuses from the seventh realm wouldn't be a threat anymore. A fierce battle broke out. But this time, the seventh wilderness had the upper hand. Everyone's fighting spirit was soaring. On the other hand, the geniuses from the seventh realm all looked gloomy. Indeed, they also knew that the outcome of this battle was doomed. Xiao Chun and Yu Shujin were still fighting fiercely. They had already started to use their trump cards. As the heir of the seventh realm, Yu Shujin naturally had many trump cards, but so did Xiao Chun. Their trump cards collided. As the battle continued, Yu Shujin's situation became worse and worse. Originally, Yu Shujin's saint's soul had been severely injured, so she wasn't suitable to continue fighting. The reason she was able to persist until now was because of her extraordinary strength. However, Everyone had their limits, and Yu Shujin was about to reach her limit. She endured the intense pain from the depths of her soul. This kind of pain was on a completely different level from physical pain. It was simply inhumane torture. For the first time, her eyes showed reluctance. She looked at Xiao Chun. Yu Shujin had never thought that she would be the one to lose in the end. She didn't dare to accept this. She was only one step away from the immortal crystal spirit vein. But it was this one step that doomed Yu Shujin to never get the immortal crystal spirit vein again. Seeing the immortal crystal spirit vein about to be obtained by Xiao Chun, one could imagine how Yu Shujin felt. She didn't want to give up, but what could she do? In her current state, she was no match for Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun. This was the first person of the same generation who had made Yu Shujin suffer such a huge loss. Yu Shujin's memory of Xiao Chun was still fresh in her mind. Of course, this memory was more likely to be filled with resentment. However, Xiao Chun didn't give Yu Shujin a chance in the face of her fear and resentment. Since he already had the absolute advantage, Xiao Chun wouldn't be as willful as Yu Shujin. It could be said that this result was completely caused by Yu Shujin himself. It was his willfulness and arrogance that gave Xiao Chun chances time and time again, which ultimately led to his defeat. If Yu Shujin had gone all out from the beginning and not given Xiao Chun any chance, Xiao Chun would probably have been defeated or even killed. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Since the outcome had already been decided, then no one could change it. After persisting for about an hour, Yu Shujin was really at the end of her rope. If this continued, she would probably die here. At this point, regardless of whether Yu Shujin was willing to accept it or not, this was the result. He had lost, and the immortal crystal spirit vein could only be given to Xiao Chun. After taking a deep look at Xiao Chun, Yu Shujin was not someone who could not recognize reality. She simply turned around and chose to leave. As Yu Shujin retreated, the other geniuses of the seventh realm naturally retreated as well. Seeing that the geniuses of the seventh realm retreated, Xiao Chun didn't chase after them. It wasn't that he didn't want to keep Yu Shujin, but Xiao Chun's condition was already very bad. Although he defeated Yu Shujin, Xiao Chun was also seriously injured. After the battle, the geniuses of the seventh wilderness came to Xiao Chun's side. Qin Shiru and the other three girls were even more concerned about Xiao Chun. After swallowing a healing elixir, Xiao Chun smiled at the four girls, indicating that he was fine. Then, he led everyone to the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein. This was the immortal crystal spirit vein, a peerless treasure that could allow one to reach the heavens in a single bound. At this time, Yu Shujin and the geniuses of the seventh realm had all retreated. The immortal crystal spirit vein really belonged to the seventh wilderness. Faced with this opportunity to reach the heavens in a single bound, Xiao Chun felt like he was dreaming. He glanced at the people around him. Since he had defeated the geniuses of the seventh realm, the next step was to determine the ownership of the immortal crystal spirit vein. But just as Xiao Chun looked over, Long Yang pushed Xiao Chun to the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein and said with a smile, "Go, it belongs to you. Brother Long Yang." Upon hearing Long Yang's words, Xiao Chun opened his mouth. But before he could finish his sentence, Tian Mushi interrupted him. "All right, didn't we agree that the immortal crystal spirit vein would belong to whoever kills Yu Shujin? Now that Yu Shujin has been defeated by you, the immortal crystal spirit vein naturally belongs to you. Cut the crap and go in." Long Yang and Tian Mushi both expressed their opinions. Afterward, the Divine Lord and the other first sons who were lucky enough to survive nodded slightly at Xiao Chun. It was obvious that they agreed with Long Yang and Tian Mushi. After this battle, Xiao Chun had successfully confirmed his position as the first holy child of the seventh wilderness. In terms of cultivation, Xiao Chun was undoubtedly the best among all the holy children of the seventh wilderness. As for his combat strength, it was obvious to everyone that he was absolutely powerful. Everyone recognized Xiao Chun as the first holy child of the seventh wilderness. In that case, it was only natural that Xiao Chun obtained the immortal crystal spirit vein. Upon seeing this, Xiao Chun scanned the crowd and finally fixed his eyes on Qin Shu, Xin Yuanling, Long Qing, and the others. Upon seeing this, everyone nodded at Xiao Chun. After taking a deep breath, Xiao Chun finally walked into the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein under everyone's watchful eyes. And as soon as Xiao Chun entered, the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein disappeared. It was apparent that the immortal crystal spirit vein belonged to Xiao Chun alone. Back to the time when Shu Jin and the others were retreating outside the northern underworld celestial realm, in the endless starry sky, the heavenly way was rushing toward the northern underworld celestial realm. He had been paying attention to the situation in the northern underworld celestial realm. Now that Xiao Chun and the others were about to win, the heavenly way immediately set off and rushed toward the northern underworld celestial realm. However, just as the heavenly way was about to reach the northern underworld celestial realm, a figure appeared in front of him and blocked his way. This person was none other than the heavenly way's old rival, the realm lord of the Hachibara Senkai's seventh realm, Luo Li. Upon seeing Luo Li, the heavenly way's eyes flashed with a cold glint, and he said indifferently, "Luo Li, your seventh realm has already lost." "I know." Upon hearing that, Luo Li revealed a gentle smile and said, "Then why are you still stopping me?" The heavenly way snorted coldly. "Huh, why? Are you afraid? Are you afraid that your scandals will be known by others?" The seventh wilderness. Luo Li smiled and said. Upon hearing Luo Li's words, the heavenly way's eyes flashed with anger, and he immediately attacked without saying a word. The two most powerful almighties in the world were exchanging blows at this moment. It was so shocking that it could be said that they were existences that could destroy the world. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1567. The will of the heavenly way and Luo Li's battle was beyond terrifying. However, during the battle, it was obvious that the will of the heavenly way was eager to escape, as if there was something urgent. On the other hand, Luo Li was not in a hurry. He just wanted to delay the will of the heavenly way. Being entangled by Luo Li, the will of the heavenly way could not escape for a while. He immediately shouted coldly, "Luo Li, what do you want?" "Oh, nothing. The seventh realm's heir of Kunlun is going to change. Xiao Chun is not bad. I think highly of him," Luo Li said with a faint smile. Hearing Luo Li's words, the will of the heavenly way's eyes immediately turned cold. He then sneered and said, "Luo Li, do you think it's possible? Xiao Chun will go back to your seventh realm?" Haha, that's hard to say. Xiao Chun will know a lot of things when he obtains the power of all living things. By then, I'm afraid that the will of the heavenly way will no longer be a noble existence in his eyes, right? Luo Li laughed. The power of all living things? Hearing this, the will of the heavenly way's eyes became gloomier and his expression became extremely ugly. The power of all living things might be unfamiliar to the world, but it would be very familiar if it was changed to another name. It was the immortal crystal spiritual vein. That's right. The power of all living things that Luo Li mentioned was the immortal crystal spiritual vein that the will of the heavenly way mentioned. The two were the same thing, but they were called by different names. What exactly was in the power of all living things that made Luo Li so confident that Xiao Chun would change his view of the will of the heavenly way after obtaining the power of all living things? No one knew. Upon hearing Luo Li's words, the will of the heavenly way said coldly with a gloomy expression, "Luo Li, you've already planned this. Originally, Luo Li had threatened the will of the heavenly way with the gate of the immortal realm to open the northern underworld immortal world. The will of the heavenly way thought that Luo Li only wanted the power of all living things to help you, Shujin, break through to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manor. But now, it seemed that Luo Li's plan wasn't that simple. In the face of the will of the heavenly way's angry roar, Luo Li chuckled and said, "It's not as complicated as you think. Originally, I only wanted Shu Jin to obtain the power of all living things to advance to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manner. But Shu Jin failed to live up to expectations and was defeated by Shao Chun. As a result, I'm naturally very interested in that little guy called Shao Chun. And this little guy obtained the power of all living things to advance to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manner. It just so happens that he will become the heir of the seventh realm," Luo Li said with a smile. Upon hearing this, the will of the heavenly way was infuriated. He didn't expect things to develop like this. And now, what the will of the heavenly way cared about the most was that Shao Chun would find out about the power of all living things after he obtained it. When that time came, what exactly could make the will of the heavenly way so nervous? Naturally, only Shao Chun could find out the secret. While the will of the heavenly way was being held back by Luo Li, Shao Chun had already entered the immortal crystal spirit vein, or rather, the power of all living things. Walking in the power of all living things, this place was very different from what Shao Chun had imagined. It was like an endless path of light that was shrouded in white light. It didn't look like a spirit vein at all. However, as Shao Chun walked in the path of light, the white light suddenly began to enter Shao Chun's brain. Then, Shao Chun's consciousness began to blur. Along with a burst of dizziness, Shao Chun seemed to have entered another world. In this world, heaven and earth were just formed, and many creatures were born together with heaven and earth. With the emergence of heaven and earth and many creatures, the embryonic form of the world was also presented to Shao Chun. In the beginning, everything was fine. Many creatures used their power to provide for heaven and earth used this power to provide for the creatures, so that the creatures could live as long as heaven and earth. Both sides were like a cycle of reincarnation. Heaven and earth relied on the power of the saints to grow, and the saints also lived in heaven and earth. But soon, with the appearance of the will of heaven and earth, everything changed. The creatures continued to use their power to provide for heaven and earth, but the will of heaven and earth began to enslave them. Perhaps people nowadays have forgotten that heaven and earth and all creatures were actually equal. Both sides could be said to have a relationship of mutual benefit. All creatures nurtured heaven and earth nurtured all creatures. This relationship of equality was completely changed with the appearance of the will of the heavenly way. The will of heaven and earth extracted the ancestral spirits of all creatures and integrated them into heaven and earth. Without the ancestral spirits, all creatures could not live as long as heaven and earth. At the same time, the will of heaven and earth also fabricated lies to deceive all creatures. It said that all creatures were created by heaven and earth, and that heaven was the father and earth was the mother. It attempted to enslave all creatures. Moreover, the will of the heavenly way also taught all creatures to cultivate. However, this kind of cultivation was actually a joke. This was because the will of heaven and earth had extracted the ancestral spirits. After all creatures were born, they had no ability to improve themselves at all. They could only rely on cultivation to obtain power. It could be said that the will of the heavenly way first took away the power of all creatures, and then gave them the method of cultivation. Moreover, all creatures were extremely grateful to it. It should have been two sides of equality, but now all creatures were completely enslaved. Moreover, this was nothing. The will of the heavenly way established life and death, and told all creatures that everyone would be born, grow old, get sick, and die. This was the reincarnation of heaven, and it could not be changed. However, little did they know that all those who died were actually used as nourishment by the will of the heavenly way to nourish itself. All creatures should have lived as long as heaven and earth, because they were born together with heaven and earth. It could be said that they were born from the same mother. However, now, the will of the heavenly way took away the power of all creatures and treated them as slaves and nourishment. It used the flesh and blood of all creatures to nourish heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the flesh and blood of all creatures, the power of heaven and earth became stronger and stronger, while the power of all creatures became weaker and weaker. In the end, the will of the heavenly way used the power of heaven and earth to construct the laws, and these laws were rules that heaven and earth used to control all creatures. They were rules set by heaven and earth, and all creatures could only obtain power from the laws of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth completely enslaved all creatures, but in the end, many powerhouses among the creatures stood up and rebelled against heaven and earth. This was the time when the will of the heavens was passed down. Unable to accept being enslaved by heaven and earth, all creatures chose to rebel. However, the end result was predictable. All creatures were suppressed, and the powerhouses who led the resistance were killed one by the will of the heavenly way. Scenes flashed through Xiao Chen's mind. Looking at this scene, a look of shock and doubt appeared in his eyes. For a moment, he couldn't accept everything in his mind. Moreover, through this information, Xiao Chen also knew that the place he was in now was not an immortal crystal spirit vein, but the power of all creatures. The power of all creatures was actually the power gathered by all creatures. It was to allow all creatures to obtain the power to resist the will of heaven, to break the laws of heaven, and to break free from the enslavement of the will of heaven. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1568. They came from the same origin and were born together. But if the images that he saw were real, wouldn't it mean that everything he came into contact with since he was young was a lie? It was the will of the heavenly way that deprived all living beings of their ancestral spirits and turned the saints into the products of heaven and earth, while heaven and earth became the object of worship for all living beings. Not only were there ancestral spirits, but there were also so-called races mentioned in the images, which were actually created by the will of the heavenly way. As the will of the heavenly way didn't wish for all living beings to be united and had hoped that they would fight among themselves, the will of the heavenly way created racial divisions. In fact, when heaven and earth were born and all living beings first appeared, there were no races at all, and all living beings were equal. All living beings who were supposed to be on par with heaven and earth were forcefully suppressed by heaven and earth into working hard and rearing cattle and sheep in captivity. Everything was different from what he imagined. It could also be said that if all of this was real, it would almost overturn Xiao Chen's entire outlook on life and the world. The will of the heavenly way enslaved all living beings. How is that possible? Who could accept such a fact in such a short time? He didn't expect to see such a scene one day. The so-called heaven is the father and earth is the mother saying was actually all a lie. Of course, would Xiao Chen believe the images before his eyes? He wasn't sure yet. After all, it was impossible for Xiao Chen to believe with just these images. But now, it didn't matter whether Xiao Chen believed it or not, because at that moment, the white light from all directions was constantly converging into Xiao Chen's body. The white light was the power of all living beings. After absorbing the power of all living beings, Xiao Chen's ancestral spirits changed and recovered. And once the ancestral spirits recovered, Xiao Chen would be reborn. There would be a huge metamorphosis in all aspects, and even his talents would be improved. It could be said that the power of all living beings was all the power left behind by all living beings in order to resist heaven and earth. In this way, the will of the heavenly way's words were easily proven to be true. Before the northern underworld celestial realm existed, the will of the heavenly way said that the immortal crystal spirit vein could only allow one person to break through to the immortal realm. That was true. However, the real reason why the will of the seventh wilderness didn't use this immortal crystal spirit vein was because it wasn't a spirit vein at all, but the power of all living beings. Of course, if someone were to enter it, that person would know the grudges between heaven and earth and all living beings. When that happened, wouldn't the lies of heaven and earth, of course, the will of the heavenly way, and the will of the heavenly way didn't want anyone to know the will of the heavenly way, the will of the heavenly ways of the heavenly way. The heavenly way source of power came from heaven and heaven and earth's power came from all living beings. The will of the heavenly way had made such a shocking lie, but Shao Chun had found out about it today. Therefore, even though Shao Chen's body was constantly being infused with white light, and his cultivation was also increasing. However, Shao Chen's entire body was like a single character at this moment. There was no reaction at all. It couldn't be helped. Shao Chen found it hard to accept this fact. Moreover, if this was the case, then the Hachibiru Senkai were not invaders. They represented all living beings who wanted to fight against the will of the heavenly way. They were not evil beyond redemption. On the contrary, for people like Shao Chun, the Hachibiru Senkai was a closer companion. It was the complete opposite. The will of the heavenly Tao, which was revered by everyone, was now the greatest enemy. Heaven and earth had deceived all living beings, treating them as livestock and endless nourishment. He was completely dumbfounded. All of this was beyond Shao Chen's imagination. Shao Chun did not even feel anything when his cultivation base kept rising. At that moment, however, Shao Chun felt as though his heart was in a mess. He simply could not describe what he was feeling. While Shao Chun was in a state of confusion, the people from the seventh wilderness scattered in all directions to collect the spiritual herbs in the northern underworld immortal realm. Although they were no longer qualified to obtain the immortal crystal spiritual vein, the spiritual treasures in the northern underworld immortal realm still made them excited. It should be known that the treasures in the northern underworld immortal realm were not only precious, but many of them were also extinct in the outside world. Thinking about it, if they could bring these spiritual treasures out, each of them would be priceless. Moreover, many of them would be of great help to the cultivation of the saints. There were indeed many good things. Therefore, as they continued to collect these good things, their spirits gradually rose. Everyone could be said to have gained a lot. Of course, no one knew what Shao Chun had encountered. Perhaps in their opinion, after entering the immortal crystal spiritual vein, Shao Chun had probably started to cultivate. They knew nothing about what had happened to Shao Chun. As for the outside world, in the starry sky, Luo Li and the will of the heavenly way, no one knew about it. Dtion E of the seventh wilderness and Luo Li, the realm lord of the seventh realm, had been fighting fiercely for a long time. However, until now, both of them seemed to be fine. With their strength, it would be very difficult for them to die, even if they wanted to. However, after such a long and fierce battle, Luo Li was getting more relaxed, while the will of the heavenly way's face was getting gloomier and gloomier. Calculating the time, Shao Chun should have obtained the power of living beings by now. In that case, Shao Chun should have some understanding of what had happened in the past. After understanding what kind of person the will of the heavenly way was, as one of the living beings in the world, would Shao Chun still be willing to worship such a will of the heavenly way? Would he still be willing to live under the so-called protection of heaven and earth? Luo Li had a faint smile in his eyes, and the will of the heavenly way obviously guessed what he was thinking. After a fierce battle, the will of the heavenly way was the first to stop. He looked coldly at Luo Li and shouted, "Luo Li, do you think you can change anything by doing this? Heaven and earth are supreme. This is already a mark engraved in the souls of all living beings. How can a mere Shao Chun shake it?" The will of the heavenly way didn't choose to attack again, because he knew that Shao Chun must have obtained the power of living beings. It was impossible to stop him now. He could only think of other ways. Seeing that the will of the heavenly way didn't intend to continue attacking, Luo Li smiled and said, 1,000 miles of dike can be destroyed by an ant's nest. Paper can't wrap fire. The living beings of the seventh wilderness aren't fools. Heaven and earth want to suppress all living beings and make them work like cattle and horses. That's just wishful thinking. Wake up soon. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1569. The Will of the Heavenly Way and Luo Li didn't attack again. After all, they had achieved their goal. Xiao Chun had probably obtained the power of living beings. Therefore, even if the will of the Heavenly Way rushed to the northern underworld, it would be useless. Since they had succeeded, there was no reason for them to continue attacking. Therefore, Luo Li and the will of the Heavenly Way stood facing each other. Neither of them had the intention to attack. Xiao Chun might have known everything from the power of living beings, but the will of the Heavenly Way couldn't stop it now. Even if he was the will of the Heavenly Way, he couldn't enter the power of living beings, let alone destroy it. For all living beings, the power of living beings was an absolute great opportunity. For the will of the Heavenly Way, the power of living beings was the resentment and hatred of all living beings towards him. All living beings didn't want to be suppressed by the world, and they didn't want to be enslaved by the world. That was why the power of living beings existed. To put it bluntly, the appearance of the power of living beings was because all living beings wanted to resist and stand up anew. Hearing Luo Li's words, the will of the Heavenly Way sneered. It was because there was no one else present. Otherwise, if others saw this, even the Wine Taoist and the others, they would be frightened by the will of the Heavenly Way's current expression, gloomy and evil. At this moment, the will of the Heavenly Way didn't have the usual righteous feeling. It was as if he was a completely different person. Looking at Luo Li with a sneer, the will of the Heavenly Way sneered. Luo Li, don't be happy too early. Your 8 Desolation Temple has now been dragged into a quagmire. It's simply a joke if you want to conquer 8 Desolation. Just wait. It won't be long before your 7th realm will roll back on its own. Will of the Heavenly Way said coldly. Hearing this, Luo Li smiled and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Will of the Heavenly Way also disappeared. No one knew that a great battle had taken place here. Following the departure of the Will of the Heavenly Way, Luo Li also disappeared from the sky. The originally pitch-black starry sky once again regained its calm. The battle between Will of the Heavenly Way and Luo Li had ended, but Xiao Chen's breakthrough was also beginning. At this time, Xiao Chun was breaking through to the Great Sage Realm. With the help of the power of living beings, it was actually not too difficult for Xiao Chun to break through to the Great Sage Realm. However, what Xiao Chun really cared about at this time was the recovery of the ancestral spirits. The ancestral spirits should be said to be a part of the soul. Originally, all the saints wanted to have it, but unfortunately, it was forcibly taken away by the world. Moreover, from then on, the descendants of all living beings would no longer have the ancestral spirits. To put it bluntly, the ancestral spirits were a gift from the world to all living beings. With the ancestral spirits, all living beings would probably have the talent of a heaven's pride. Cultivation was almost as simple as eating and drinking. Without the ancestral spirits, it proved that the talent had been taken away by others. Therefore, it was so difficult for all living beings to cultivate. In fact, there was no way to verify the ancient matters now. However, one thing was certain, and that was the talent of the warriors who had the ancestral spirits would be at least 90 meters and above. What kind of concept was this? In other words, when the world was first formed, the weakest talent of all living beings born with the world was at least 90 meters. In other words, it meant that at the time, a random last place or a piece of trash would be at least a quasi-saint in the present day. It was even possible for them to compete for the position of the Holy Sun. This was the horror of the ancestral spirits. Unfortunately, they were forcibly taken away by the world in the end. Without the ancestral spirits, all living beings were like old men who had their teeth pulled out. It was simply countless times more difficult to cultivate. In addition, the will of the heavenly way created a heavenly punishment to restrict the breakthroughs of all living beings. It could be said that when the ancestral spirits were taken away, it was equivalent to all living beings being forcibly knocked down a level by the world. As a result, they became the slaves of the world. The most important thing about the power of living beings was to help warriors recover their ancestral spirits. This was more important than the improvement of cultivation. In fact, it was precisely because of the recovery of the ancestral spirits that one could use the power of living beings to break through to the immortal realm and condense the heavenly immortal mansion. Time passed day by day. In the power of living beings, Xiao Chun sat cross-legged. He was already surrounded by rich white light. It was unknown how much time had passed. At this time, Xiao Qin's cultivation had reached the limit of the great sage, great perfection realm. Moreover, the ancestral spirits in his body had also been successfully formed. Somehow, Xiao Qian felt that his talent seemed to have improved a lot. Xiao Qin's talent was 99 meters. Originally, it was the same as Sir God, Tian Mushi, Long Yang, and others. But now, because of the formation of the ancestral spirits, Xiao Qian felt that his talent had probably reached the maximum value of 100. The difference of 1 meter between 99 and 100 for maximum value talent should not be underestimated. Sometimes, a difference of a millimeter could be a difference of 1,000 miles. This difference of 1 meter was like heaven and earth. The maximum value talent was already considered rare even in the ancient times when all living beings had just appeared. At that time, although all living beings still had ancestral spirits and cultivation was extremely simple, those who could reach the maximum value talent were absolutely rare. Most of them were still between 90 to 95 meters. The ancestral spirits only allowed all living beings in ancient times to cultivate, and their talents were very good. However, a prodigy was still a prodigy. There were still not many people who could reach the maximum value talent. To put it simply, the ancestral spirits only allowed the saints to have a higher starting point. They could feel the spirit of heaven and earth when they were born. The ancestral spirits had taken shape, and in the abdomen, Xiao Chun could clearly feel that the original Dantian began to evolve like the Holy Realm Mansion. It was originally a ball-shaped Dantian, but at this moment, it was as if it was about to break out of its shell. Layers of cracks had already appeared on its surface, and from within, strands of extremely pure spiritual qi were continuously spreading out. His eyes were closed all the time, like an old monk in meditation. After a long time, the Dantian in Xiao Qin's body finally burst open with a bang. The Dantian burst open. Immediately, in the original position of the Dantian in Xiao Qin's abdomen, a golden holy realm mansion about the size of a palm condensed. It looked very exquisite and small, and it was also very temporary. Even the carvings on the top of the holy realm mansion could be seen. This was Xiao Qin's holy realm mansion, and it was a heavenly holy realm mansion. The holy realm mansion condensed by using the power of living beings was the heavenly holy realm mansion. With the initial formation of the heavenly holy realm mansion, the breakthrough barrier of the holy realm in Xiao Qin's body was also naturally broken at this time. For a time, Xiao Qin's aura also rose. From the great sage, great perfection, it was almost only a few seconds, and he quickly rushed to the holy realm level. With Xiao Qin's breakthrough, the space above the northern underworld celestial realm was torn apart, and a strong pressure slammed down fiercely. Heaven's punishment. This was heaven's punishment. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.